let in some late arrivals, and I'm waiting for Heather McGray to come and join us. It looks a very full auditorium from here, and I want to say, I'll take my mask off, I think I'm allowed to do that. So we're going to allow and say hello to our virtual participants who are here on Zoom. Oh, here's Heather. Excellent.
Welcome, everyone. My name's Heather McGray. I'm the director of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, and we're one of the founding members of the collaborative that is hosting here. This is the first in-person event of the Climate Justice Just Transition Funders Collaborative. And as the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, I wanted to give a little bit of background on it. We are hosting the collaborative and so grateful for Farhana's leadership of it. Climate justice, as you know, is an approach that centers people, their priorities, and their lived experience right at the heart of climate action. And it's increasingly important that we think about climate this way in a climate justice approach. It recognizes that historic injustices, gender inequality, patriarchy, colonization, racism, many of these really affect what happens, why we're having a climate crisis and what its consequences are. And putting this at the heart of how we solve a climate crisis is what we're all about with this collaborative. A climate-safe world really requires dismantling the unjust social, political, and economic systems, and climate action represents one of the best opportunities to tackle this systemic change. That's what we're talking about when we talk about climate justice or a just transition. It's systemic change. It's the multiple challenges that we see coming together in the climate crisis. Now, one of the ways we're going to get at that intersection of challenges, that multiplicity of challenges today, is through an innovative approach with a group of cartoon artists who are joining us remotely. Hello, cartoon artists.
Next slide. I think you.
This gives you a flavor for some of the cartoons that we've developed in the past in partnership with Cartoon Collections and the Red Cross Climate Center. This web address here, this very simple web address, tinyurl.com/cartoons, is where you can go to take a look at some of these cartoons, give some feedback on them, and that's going to go directly to artists who are working with us today, from India, from New York, from the Netherlands, all around the world. We have people working with us on this project. You can give some feedback on the cartoons, you can make some comments, and that's going to go to the artists who are listening in on our discussions today, and they're going to produce some new cartoons for us to build upon some of this kind of commentary and feed it into some of these very challenging conversations sometimes around what is a just transition and how do we move forward together in a way that really lifts up those who are most vulnerable and who are on the front lines of climate change. This collaborative has come together specifically to tackle some of these issues and to make sure that philanthropy in particular is as knowledgeable as possible about climate justice and the just transition, and is able to work together to solve some of these changes and to really get at the root cause and at the systemic changes that we need to see. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Farhana, who's been coordinating this really unique effort and working so hard to keep us all kind of going forward on this, and who brings such a wealth of experience in so many aspects of climate justice, from these negotiations to her own experience with civil disobedience to past experience working on all aspects of this issue. So Farhana, why don't you take it from here and tell us what we're up to.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you so much. I think if we go back to the first slide, that would be great. Thank you. Brilliant. So this tells you a little bit about the background to the collaboration. I was approached by Heather in February of this year asking if I would be interested in helping her and her work with a number of foundations to educate ourselves about climate justice and just transition. And we're going to use these two terms. And I jumped at the chance because those two terms are both in the Paris Agreement. They're in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. There's a paragraph on just transition and the need to provide decent jobs. And that was very much put there by the Labour movement, with obviously the support of many delegations. Nothing gets into a treaty without a huge numbers, thousands of hours of negotiations. So that thousands of hours of negotiations, huge group effort to put that preamble in. And then there's a second preambular paragraph. You can tell I'm a lawyer, right? So there's a second preambular paragraph, paragraph 13, which calls on parties to take into account and respect the rights of everyone, especially Mother Earth, call on the integrity of all ecosystems, and says climate justice is important for some, I'm paraphrasing. And it's always bothered me that there is this word some, that climate justice is important for some. It's almost as if climate justice is in air quotes. And that has irked me always since the Paris Agreement was negotiated. And we haven't done enough to really properly operationalize, to make good on those preambular provisions. There's some progress, obviously, that's been made. There's some committees, there's some aspects where justice, where fairness, where equity, these are all the same words that we use, common but differentiated responsibilities, to reference the simple core truth that the climate crisis is a crisis that is caused disproportionately by some people and actually disproportionately impacts others in a very disproportional way, and how that crisis has arisen and links in with everyday issues of housing, jobs, health, opportunities, access to nature is what this collaboration is all about. So I was very excited to take that up. I've been immensely fortunate in having Heather and the CJRF really be the hub of this collaboration, and also very, very fortunate that this has come at a time when another organisation that I'm a director of, Impatience Earth, has agreed to act as a hub, as a collaborator, as a support for this effort. So I just want to introduce the team that has helped all of you be present. So I want also to recognise that it's not been easy to carve out, 2-3 hours to make the effort to come here, provide all your passports, get through the accreditation process, let alone all the journeys that you had to make to come here. So thank you for all of that. And just want to invite onto the stage so you can see them, the team that you've been probably in touch with. So Aditi Shah, who's going to be one of your moderators, Jouja Maamri. And these two will be moderating a couple of the sessions. They're both directors at Impatience Earth, which is trying to get 100 million in philanthropy in the next couple of years. Isabella Noera, Safi Yule, who's going to talk about some of the work that we have. And then, as they weren't, Alina Sabah, who wasn't able to get her visa, sadly, in time to join us, and Carol Sarkis, who has also been helping, and also Hillary, wherever she is. Hillary Heath, always hiding in the background. There she is. So I just want to acknowledge that actually an event like this takes a lot of time and effort, and your support is very much welcome. The collaborative is going to focus on 3 buckets of work. I think if you scroll down, so next slide. So the 3 buckets are learning, which we've done through a series of webinars. We've had 2 or 3 webinars already, where there's another one that's going to happen tomorrow at the University of Strathclyde, and we'll get details of that to you after we send you information from today. And the idea of the webinars is really that actually we all have a lot of learning to do. We've got a lot of assumptions that we've made about who has the real solutions, who's the real leaders, and essentially a lot of the solutions and the leadership is going to come from the Global South, which has not been a recipient of philanthropy in the same way that organizations in the US and Europe. And that was a finding from the research that underlay why this collaborative took shape. So that's why a lot of the panels today are really going to be from people from the Global South, practitioners, thought leaders, movement leaders, in conversation with philanthropy, all as equals. We are all as equals here. And there's a lot of power dynamics that have got to be challenged and changed. So that's really at the heart of why we're having 3 sets of panels, bringing politicians, thought leaders, those who are negotiating these very issues, trying to get these operationalization of these provisions in the official outcome of the COP26, along with those who are hopefully going to carry that work forward in philanthropy, in campaigning, in advocacy, in supporting communities as they tackle both with the impacts of climate change which are happening, as well as the transition to a better world. So these 2 provisions will stay very much at the forefront of our thinking. I think you've introduced the cartoons. I want you all to look under your seats if you haven't done so already, and you'll see this envelope. You don't have to open it now. Take it home and really, really enjoy the thing that's in here. And I want to also introduce and let you know about a gift that all of you are welcome to receive. It's a surprise. It's from a group of artists called Walking Forest, and it will be a lovely, lovely, lovely surprise for you when you receive this gift. So, you know, that's a little token of our thanks for you. There will be freebies, but there will be really brilliant freebies for you to do. And so please have a look at those and get in touch with us after today's event. We'll let you know about how to collect your free gift from the Walking Forest team. I think what I want to do now is to let you know about some of the concrete ways in which you can get involved to support the collaborative's work. We know that there are many foundations, many practitioners, many opportunities where we need to collaborate with each other, and we're inviting you to contribute to the second part of our work, which is a landscape and a mapping of who's doing what in the climate justice, just transition space. And this landscape and mapping is a very common tool used in philanthropy. You have to go out and find out who's doing what. But this time we're trying to open it up and almost invite the field to create this tool, and for the tool to be useful for everyone, not just for philanthropy, but also for those who are in that space. So I'm going to turn over to Safi now, who's worked on this tool along with Alina and Carol, who are not here. So thank you. I know you're watching.
Yes, I don't have a mic, so I'm going to use the podium. Yeah.
And the idea of the tool is essentially there's a whole bunch of new foundations, the old foundations. Everyone wants to know how to take things forward. So this tool, which Safi's going to explain, is there to help you, and it's a very much in its early prototype form. And Safi will explain what we'd like you to do with it. Thank you. Over to you, Safi.
Brilliant. Yeah, and thank you everyone for being here. So there's a brief description of the compendium there, but as Farhana said, it was really envisaged as a tool not just for philanthropy, but also for the field itself. So a way to sort of centralize and really give credit to all of the people doing really amazing work, and all of the literature, resources, reports that are already out there, and just sort of need to be seen. So the 3 main sections of it is a bibliography on climate justice and just transition resources. So reports, articles, podcasts, videos, manifestos, teaching materials, everything is there. And with the help of Carol and Alina, we've compiled 150 resources so far, and many, many more need to be added in. Yeah, that's the first sort of bucket. And then we've also separated out tools for funders. So toolkits for participatory grant making, analyzing power dynamics within philanthropy, and also reports on how to better resource civil society movements and climate justice movements around the world. There is a lot of learning and insight that's already out there, and it's just accessing and sharing it. And that's really what the compendium is sort of all about. And the third bucket is this massive field mapping. So if we could go to the next slide. And but this is a very, very small snippet of literally just the names of some of the organisations we've managed to find. And at the moment, actually, in the compendium, there's 400 organisations, mainly focused in the Global South, organised by country, but also on what they're working on, the type of organisation they are, and that's all in there. There's 400 organisations there at the moment, but also 300 yet to be added in that we found already. And that's without inviting all of you to share your networks and your knowledge. So there's something sort of really special here. Yeah, and a small snippet. If we could go to the next slide, though. This work will obviously never be fully completed, and we really hope that can be sort of a live tool that's constantly added to, and that requires help from all of you. The sort of next steps that we've identified is drawing from other resources that are out there, like the Environmental Justice Atlas, that is sort of geocoded and represented very visually at the top. And that would be really helpful for sort of having, identifying where things are missing. On top of that, translating the compendium, a lot of the resources are currently in English. We feel like it's really important that that doesn't stay the case, and that the compendium is as accessible as possible. And the third thing would be representing not just the individual organizations, but the connections between them. You know, lots of work is replicated and it's not as fast moving as we need it. And highlighting those connections in between organizations, who's funding what, who's in what coalitions is really, really valuable and is something that we want to do. So this resource will be made available, it'll be added to in the next few months. And we're inviting you, if you'd like to please, yeah, collaborate with us and make it even better. But thank you, really looking forward to the event today. And I'll pass it back to Farhana.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much. I'll invite Heather to come and introduce the next two speakers, I think. But yeah, one of the key, things that I've always tried to do is join up people. I'm a connector, a weaver. I like joining the dots more than I like anything else, probably. And, in philanthropy, we too can join up our learnings, our tools, our resources. There aren't always ways to do that. Sometimes the big philanthropies cooperate well with each other, but they don't always understand or involve the smaller philanthropies. So I think here we have a fantastic opportunity, big or small, whether you're in the global north, the global south, to really put together something very special. As Safi said, we became very aware, we already know this, that so much of the literature, so much of the material is really in English. And that reflects a much bigger problem that we have in climate change, which is, apart from the very basic texts, which are translated into the 6 UN languages, we know the vast majority of climate-related literature, tools, formal documents are not in 50% of the world's population isn't covered by those 6 languages. It's covered by other languages, Hindi, Urdu, Indonesia, Malay. All of those languages are missing, and we're acutely aware in the compendium that that's what we need, is to support activists, organizations in the global south using local languages to add to that and maybe create that, and maybe they've got better resources. So really invite you to join us, get in contact with us, and get funding ready to support that effort. I don't need your funding, but they need that funding to create those tools. So that's a very concrete thing that we're taking forward. So over to you, Heather.
I'd like to invite one of our founding member foundations, Masego, if you could come on up, just to have a welcome directly from one of our members, and a few reflections on the journey, I think, of one of the earliest actors in philanthropy on climate justice in this global space. Masego, over to you.
Right. Dumelang ka pula. Greetings, everyone. And Dumelang ka pula is Setswana translated to greetings, and I greet you in the name of rain, because coming from a dry country, rain is such a significant thing for us, and we use it in all salutations. I thought I should bring that. It is my privilege to address you today in this very important and timely convening. My name is Masego Madzwamusa. I'm the Director of the Environment Program at the Oak Foundation, a family-led philanthropic organization which commits its resources to address issues of global, social, environmental concern, particularly those that have a major impact on the lives of the disadvantaged. Through our grant making, we support others to make the world a safer, fairer, and more sustainable place to live. Supporting social justice and equity represents the core values across all our programs at the Oak Foundation, from preventing sexual abuse of children to the protection of international human rights, including climate change. In 2015, the Oak Foundation committed $25 million towards the climate justice movement by building a more people-centered rights approach to climate change, especially designed to meet the needs of those who are most disadvantaged. You could tell from my salutations that English is not my first language. My colleague Anne Henshaw, including our trustee Caroline Tanner, were one of the first people who were visionaries in accompanying the climate justice movement in this journey, and I'd like to acknowledge their leadership in that role. The first series of grants were made to support youth, women, and indigenous peoples to advance their calls for justice and equity in the lead up to the climate negotiations in Paris in 2015. The remainder of the funding went to the creation of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, which we've just heard about. The CJRF is a re-granting mechanism that has supported community-driven networks and coalitions in Africa, in Asia, and the Arctic. It has not only helped to build climate resilience, but also to call attention to the systemic drivers of injustice and address them by building people's power, recognizing the various knowledge systems and supporting solutions that are driven from the bottom up. With more partners on board, the fund could cover more geographies. As we look ahead, I think I can speak for the whole foundation in saying that we are committed to issues of justice, equity, and people-centered approaches to addressing the climate crisis, not simply because it's important from a moral standpoint. Though that is important, it is because such approaches can deliver systems-level changes at scales in both the global south and the marginalized communities in the global north. As a philanthropic community, there is an opportunity to invest in the capacity that already exists. There are plenty of organizations, networks, and coalitions that are already well positioned to do the work that is necessary. And I think we will get to hear from them throughout the afternoon. They simply are just underfunded, and we can't achieve lasting change without them. We have to address the power imbalances that are created by the existing funding blind spots. We are eager to partner with other donors who share these values and provide the support that is necessary to build and sustain a just, fair, and inclusive future for the planet and people. And we invite you to join the rest of us in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Oak Foundation. I remember very much, many colleagues who were funded by Oak for many, many years. So it's great to have you here and to have your support also for taking this collaborative forward. Thank you. I'd like to invite our high-level panel members to please join me here on the first for the first panel, if that's okay. Please do. Please collect a bottle of water if you need one from the chairs there. And to those of you who are watching, I think we can all join, unless you want to speak at the lectern. If you want to speak at the lectern, you can do that.
Happy to.
Or use the mics there. So, Excellencies, please come and join the panel here. Kate, Tasneem. Excellent, everyone is here. Well done, thank you. So, and we're almost on time, so I'm especially delighted by that. So this first panel has got some very key people. Do you want to? Not yet, sorry, thank you. Thank you, you're in a different panel, thank you. So yeah, there's some very key people who are, today is Finance Day in the negotiations. And so, you know, especially as this event is about funding the justice reset from Glasgow to COP27, I'm going to ask and invite our speakers to say a little bit about what is happening in the negotiations. What do we really need to get a justice reset for the longer term? And what is the contribution that each of you is bringing as Scotland, as the CVF chair, Special Envoy here from Bangladesh, our leaders from civil society, what they're calling for. So that's really the backdrop to this panel. Without political signals, without leadership from the blue zone, we will not be able to, on our own, get to the just world. We will not be able to have a transition that is fair. We will not be able to correct historic wrongs, and we won't be able to do that in ways that is centered on the people who really should be at the forefront of leading those solutions. So I'm really delighted to welcome you all here. Really thank you for being here. Very short introductions. So for those again who are watching through Teams and to our audience, this panel, I'm going to do the probing and questioning. You don't get to do that. You will get to do probing and questioning through Slido and with our other things. So hold on a little bit to that. So I'm really delighted to welcome Mairi McAllan, the Scottish Minister for Environment, Biodiversity and Land, and who is also responsible for climate justice as her portfolio. His Excellency Abul Azad, who is the Commissioner and is on the Commission of Biodiversities, and he's also the Special Envoy reporting directly to Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is leading the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which is a collection of 48 countries, and I think more were added yesterday, so it's a group that's getting bigger. And I know that Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, and Sheikh Hasina met yesterday with a group of women leaders and announced an initiative there. So there's a lot of intersectional initiatives coming out of this thing. I want to also welcome His Excellency Adao Barbosa from Timor-Leste, who's also been a negotiator at the forefront of pushing for loss and damage in the climate negotiations. And for those of you who are not aware, loss and damage is simply the recognition that harm is happening, that is climate induced and has a climate component. And it's been the biggest ask of the vulnerable countries and of civil society that loss and damage be recognized. Loss and damage is what happens when there isn't enough mitigation and there isn't enough adaptation. It's the end result of these delays, and it's a big topic here. It's including the Paris Agreement. So I especially welcome you, Excellency, because I know you've been fighting this for so long. Thank you for joining us. Welcoming Tasneem Aesop, who is the Director of Climate Action Network, and Azad Rahman, who is from the COP26 coalition and has helped global society, civil society, be present to the extent possible in this meeting. So over to you, Minister, for your opening comments. I think you all have about 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. Sure.
Be heard? Thank you very much. Thank you for having me along. It's wonderful to speak to you today at this critical moment, at this vital summit, and on this most important topic of justice. I've got to say, at points like this, with so many incredible people on this panel and so many of you here, my instinct generally is to listen rather than to talk. But having been given the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Scottish Government, I'm more than happy to do so. So we're very proud to be the host city for COP26. And while we're not yet a state party to COP, we are very keen to use this key position that we have to do a couple of really important things. Firstly, in the madness and amid all the chaos of COP26, we're asking whose voices are not being heard. And the second thing that we're tasking ourselves to do is to elevate those voices, be it young people, women, girls, people from the Global South, because we believe and we know that to be successful, climate action must have fairness, justice, and inclusivity at its heart. And we've been seeking to try and lead by example with that. Our Climate Justice Fund, which we launched in 2012, was at the time a world first. It put front and centre the issues of justice in climate action. And I'm very proud to say that through that work, we have been able to facilitate the empowerment of some of the most vulnerable communities throughout the world. And I had the pleasure recently of speaking with the community in Mangamba in Malawi about the ways that that funding empowered them to build the projects of resilience in their communities. And we're taking the chance now to, firstly, to double that fund. That's something we're very proud to be doing over the course of this Parliament. But we're also reviewing it. And in doing so, we are challenging ourselves to make sure that it remains as ambitious as possible, and crucially, that it's able to reach and to serve the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable communities. So our reviewed framework will allow us to continue providing that direct grassroots support, make new interventions associated with loss and damage, and to expand our own knowledge on the prevalent issues. And all of this is critically important, as I say, to make sure that the most vulnerable people are being reached, and to be intersectional. So some of our work, for example, is about supporting young people in the Global South on the intergenerational issues of climate impacts, or to empower women to take action against the gendered impacts of climate change. So I don't want to go on for too much longer, but I would like to mention loss and damage. We all know that successful climate action needs urgent action on mitigation. It needs action and fair financing on adaptation. But as has been pointed out, there is damage, there is loss, which goes beyond anything that those efforts can now have an impact on. People are suffering right now, from floods, from drought, from desertification, and from issues which are not economically calculable, including, tragically, the loss of life. And in Scotland, we are standing up and we are saying that countries who have benefited from industrialisation must now shoulder the responsibility of dealing with where that has taken us to. It is our moral responsibility. So we're ready to play our part. And that's why this week I was so pleased that Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister, was able to be a first mover in pledging £1 million as part of the Resilience Fund for loss and damage. That is economically a drop in the ocean with what is required globally, but we really hope will spur other nations on to make the pledges that they ought to. So just in conclusion, Scotland stands in solidarity with those impacted by climate change throughout the world. We will work to elevate your voices. We will strive to have your story told, and we will accept our own moral responsibility to ensure that fairness, justice and inclusivity is at the heart of climate action. And we won't do it alone. And that's why I'm so glad that events like this are going ahead, because together we've got so much work to do and we cannot fail. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. I think you deserve a bigger applause for the Scottish Government, who have stepped up as the first developed country to actually put money on the table for loss and damage. And that is a huge sign of the shift that is needed to make COP26 a success. Because success for those communities means going away with something, knowing that they will be, that some finance, some support, and simply an acknowledgement of what they're facing now is being happening. And I think here, maybe Tasneem is appropriate for you, but maybe I'll announce that the Scottish Government receives a Ray of the Day award from Cannes. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to invite His Excellency to go to the podium and give me 1 minute to introduce Kate Hampton, who I forgot to introduce at the beginning. And it's such a terrible omission because Kate is really the person who introduced me and invited me to work with her more than 10 years ago now, a long time ago, in philanthropy. So I joined the Children's Investment Fund Foundation at the moment when the international regime was very much in crisis in 2010 after the collapse of the Copenhagen COP15. And she's just been an outstanding colleague, boss, and is just bossing it here at this conference too. Is also involved in supporting the UK presidencies in many different ways, but also as a friend of the COP presidency. So I'm especially delighted that you could be here and maybe carry some of these messages about the need for funding for loss and damage very clearly and directly in that direction. So welcome, Kate, and yeah, thanks for joining us from your busy schedule. Over to you, Excellency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farhana. Farhana is an expert panel member of Climate Vulnerable Forum for long 12 years. So dear friends, we all know most vulnerable people are women, children, aged people. These are in general. But in particular, the women, aged people and children of vulnerable countries are more vulnerable. Here I am to introduce the Climate Vulnerable Forum. What are we doing and how we can collaborate with this very effort of climate justice and just transition and towards COP27. This Climate Vulnerable Forum is an organization of 55 countries. Till yesterday it was 48. Last evening, another 7 countries joined this effort. This is a very young organization, about 12 years. Started with 11 countries. Now it is 55. So the vulnerable countries gathering together to raise their voice against climate injustice. And you are here to establish the climate justice and just transition. Maybe we are looking into the issue from different angle, but the goal is same. 1.5 degrees Celsius. CVF is advocating for that. In last October, our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who is the chair of the CVF, she also called for all the countries to have their increased NDC. But very unfortunate we find that the new declaration of NDC is not so much meaningful. But we are still continuing to advocate in a term that not only after each 5 years, the countries will think about their enhanced NDC. Because you see, in the last 2-3 months back, the report of the IPCC shows how devastating issues we are going to face. So we raise the voice that at least the most emitting country, they need to review, consider to declare their enhanced NDC every year. Because climate devastation is not being stopped. Rather, it is not being stagnant. It is increasing day by day. We, from the Climate Vulnerable Forum, just 2 weeks back, we could form a CVF parliamentary forum So these 55 countries, parliamentarians, they have gathered together to discuss the issues of vulnerability in different fora, including their own parliament, including their own country, and advocating towards the whole globe. Climate Vulnerable Forum, yesterday we had a leaders dialogue. There we had the Dhaka Glasgow Declaration, where we talked about 1.5 degree, 50-50. That is, in next 5 years, $500 billion. As earlier it was committed by the developed country, $100 billion per year, but this commitment has not been met. So now we want to have a comprehensive action plan target that in next 5 years, $500 billion, and 50-50, 50% is for adaptation and 50 for the mitigation. Then we need a comprehensive road plan, not only talks, not only the lip services, but the action. So V20 ministerial group, when we started the ministerial group of finance minister, then we had the 20 members. So we call the V20 ministerial group. But fortunately, now all the ministers from this CVF country, they gather together to have the innovative financing. Now, here it comes about the climate justice and just transition. Climate Vulnerable Forum, we organized one multi-donor climate fund, which is again managed by the UN Ops, participated by so many developed countries, so many non-government and international organizations also, putting their money here, putting their resources here, so that the justice can be ensured in all these 55 countries. Well managed by a consolidated board led by the UN Ops. I believe the development partners, the non-government organizations, philanthropy, they may come forward. And we can have a collaborative efforts with this organization. Another issue from the Climate Vulnerable Forum is the debt restructuring. We raised this issue very recently because during this pandemic COVID, most of the countries, they are not able to repay their loans. And at the same time, when they are ready to repay the loan, $100 billion is nothing in that term. So why we are telling that you need to restructure the loan, keeping pending the payment of the debts for a few years when COVID is here. This may give space to the vulnerable countries so that they can establish justice for their young men, women, and the elderly people. I will conclude with a paragraph for the loss and damage. As a consortium of nations highly vulnerable to climate change impacts, we are strongly advocating for substantial progress on loss and damage agenda at COP26, including full operationalization of Santiago network on loss and damage, in addition to executing existing commitment to the Warsaw International Mechanism. To that, I'm happy to be a part of this event today and to know the discussion with the Scottish Government and some private fundings and foundations to mobilize funding for addressing loss and damage for the most vulnerable countries. Distinguished participants, the world sets its eye on the ongoing COP26. The whole globe is looking towards Glasgow. We from CBF, with the declaration of Dhaka Glasgow, we tell that we need to address vulnerability through road towards Glasgow. So the journey starts here towards COP27. We will not stop. We will always be raising our voice. Here, participants from different countries you are here. So please join us so that we can have a more louder voice to the developed country for this 1.5 degree, $500 billion 50-50, and also loss and damage addressing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll invite His Excellency to please give us a brief history in a nutshell for those of you who are not familiar with loss and damage. It is included in Article 8 of the Paris Agreement, was fiercely resisted, but it is in there, and it was one of the fundamental asks of developing countries. And what staggers and surprises me so much, even today, is it's almost like overlooked. You know, philanthropy and countries almost flip a page and forget that this is a foundational pillar that most of the Global South supported and got in the Paris Agreement. So, and I know that couldn't have been possible without our LDC negotiators that you were leading. You've worked on this for a decade. So over to you, Ambassador Barbosa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farhana. Once again, I just nominated by my President of Republic of Timor-Leste to be Special Envoy and Ambassador of Climate Change. Once again, thank you very much for climate justice, Excellencies, colleagues and friends, especially the Minister from Scotland. We are happy to be here to express our concerns, our issues, and the hardness that we are facing at the moment with regard to loss and damage. The LDCs, there are 46 countries who are the most vulnerable one because of capacity. We have human capacity limitation, financial capacity, and also technological capacity for addressing loss and damage affected by the impact of climate change. We have asked to have institutions which are responsible for handling loss and damage issues. First one, we established Warsaw International Mechanism of Loss and Damage in Warsaw, COP19 in 2013. One of the functions of this mechanism is action and support for addressing loss and damage affected by the impact of climate change that is now being faced by the most vulnerable countries. It means financial support for addressing loss and damage is needed. Up to date, we have no loss and damage finance. There is no loss and damage financial mechanism to support financial issues, financial support for addressing loss and damage that we are facing at the moment. We have been suffering from sea level rise, floodings, drought, tropical cyclones, and so on so far. Just in chance, for my country, just this year, we lost at least $2 billion because of tropical cyclones. This is one issue. Another issue, Solomon Island, they have lost at least 5 islands in the past 3 years. This is issue that we are going to push to have something in place for addressing this issue financially. And in Madrid, that's last 2 years, COP25, we established one more entity called Santiago Network to provide technical assistance to developing countries that are vulnerable to the impact of climate change. We are negotiating this issue now at COP26. But it's not really for us to get support from our partners from developed country parties. They really don't want to put finance for loss and damage. 100 billion prayer by 2020 committed by developed country parties. It's only for both adaptation and also mitigation. 50% for adaptation and 50% for mitigation. So where is finance for loss and damage? Nothing. And we are asking to have finance for loss and damage in a broader way. It will be under post-2025 discussion. But we really don't know whether our partners will be agree upon in this or not. But for us, it's very critical for us. And loss and damage is happening now. So we are not waiting until 2025 is coming. We are asking our development partners to provide financial support right now. And they do not want to put finance in place for addressing this issue. That is the issue that we raise. And that is something that I would like to invite you all to be with us as LDCs to support this idea, to push something as part of the decision package out of this COP with regard to finance for loss and damage. So I believe that climate justice is one of the entities that is very strong to push to have justice in place in terms of climate change issues. Loss and damage is one of the elements that they are pushing. So we are with them. The LDCs are with them. The LDCs are with you. So please push this to have something in place for addressing loss and damage. And at the moment, we are asking to get decision from COP and CMA in Glasgow to operationalize Santiago Network. One of the issues as part of Santiago Network is how to link developing country needs to the financial availability out there under the convention, also outside of the convention. But to identify the functions, this is also very, very difficult for us to move forward. So I would like to thank the government of Scotland, which is putting financial support for climate justice fund within this country. So we really need to appreciate this, and we would like to welcome this initiative. Just £1 million, but this is valuable for developing countries like LDCs. We would like to invite more developing country parties to do so. This is that example. 1 million is just example. That's one of the steps forward to invite developing country parties to do so. This is part of responsibilities in the past. This is historical responsibility issues. The common but differentiated responsibilities, one of these one. We need to put something in place for developing countries who have very limited emissions, but they are suffering at the moment. So this is how we could ask developing country parties to do something for us. So this is my points, and once again, thank you very much, and we invite you all to support this concept. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much, Excellency. And as a first mover, small countries, big impact, and LDCs, Climate Vulnerable Forum, small countries trying to achieve big impacts. And His Excellency, the CVF has its own trust fund. It's run entirely by developing countries themselves, and that's whether you're a funder, there's going to be a whole load of array of different funding modalities for you to choose from, whether they'll be in the Compendium, government-led or led officially, they will be there. So we're running a teeny bit late, so I'm going to ask our two panelists, Tasneem and Azad, to be short and succinct as possible, because others have to go a little bit later. So introducing Tasneem, over to you, Tasneem, thank you, and then to Azad.
Oh, goodness. I've become voiceless. I really apologize about that. Thanks, Farhana.
I'll get you this.
So it's actually quite usual for us as civil society to do the time crunching interventions. And so I'm going to try and respect your wish, Farhana.
Thank you.
Firstly, thank you for the invitation to this really critical initiative. And it's well timed and welcomed, the Climate Justice, Just Transition Initiative. I also want to say, Minister, that our network, Climate Action Network, awarded you, your government, with the Ray of the Day for your big first step, maybe small in terms of funding, but big in terms of symbolism for developing countries, for those most vulnerable, and also very important signal to other developed countries to step up. Loss and damage, as was spoken about, is an issue that has been ignored for decades, actually, and there are veterans in this room that we know of as well that's been fighting for this, and it's been ignored by rich countries. But it is the sharp edge of climate justice, because as you have heard, it is those who are most vulnerable but least responsible for the climate crisis that's bearing the brunt of the devastation caused by losses and damages due to climate impacts. And so it is the fundamental injustice. Rich nations worried about this because they fear the concept of liability, of actually taking responsibility, the moral responsibility, and then the kind of compensation that was needed by taking that moral responsibility. And right through to Madrid, rich nations continued to block this critical issue in these negotiations. Our network, Climate Action Network, together with a very broad coalition of partners, has made the issue of finance for loss and damage the litmus test for the outcome of Glasgow. I know all of us have all these, important objectives, ensuring 1.5 degrees kept alive, and all the other objectives, but because this is an issue we can no longer ignore. Losses and damages due to climate change being exacerbated also by the health crisis, and in the end, it is the same sections of our society, those who are poor, those who are suffering inequality, those who are marginalized. And as His Excellency said, women, children, not only that, workers. And of all of that, we know that there are additional vulnerabilities when you are a person of color, when you're Black and Indigenous. So this issue of loss and damage is not a technical negotiation issue. It's about real life conditions of people, real life devastation, and we all need to stand together. And the plea by Your Excellency, we stand with you. We've come behind you in solidarity, and we are going to fight for this. We do not want to leave Glasgow without any movement on the issue of finance for loss and damage, because it is an issue of justice. Justice is not handed over to you on a platter. We have to fight for it. And we want to say very clearly as a network, we are willing to fight, and we are willing to fight with partners who are standing together with us and you in that fight. So thank you very much. Looking forward to this initiative and looking forward to making contributions about the issue of justice, just transition, and all power to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. And over to Azad. Thank you.
I'll try and be as brief as Taz there. Let me also firstly welcome the announcement by the Scottish Government. It is, of course, the first drop in what we all know is an ocean of need, but that symbolic action, of course, is all part of us breaching that dam. Secondly, I also want to thank Farhana and all the organisers and all of you actually that for bringing this together for what really is a critical organisation between us as movements, those representing citizens, and of course the philanthropic community. I'm the executive director of War and Want, and on the way here I was just remembering our first ever report 70 years ago about plan for world development, talking about 5% of countries' GDP needed to be given in reparations to the global south, talking about the importance of focusing on root drivers and structural inequality, of a globalized health and welfare system, all the things that are now, of course, part and parcel of that. And as Farhana mentioned, we're also the founders of the COP26 coalition, and we're organising very centrally around the principle of climate justice, both inside the blue zone and outside. And if you do get a chance, do go along next week to the People's Summits, to the movement assemblies. There's a whole bunch of things happening all over here. But I was really just reminded that about that moment 15 years ago, when our movements, whose realities and perspectives had largely been marginalised within the climate summit, first began to collectively work together to lift up this call for climate justice, not just as a slogan or a throwaway line, but really as a conceptual understanding of both the crisis we faced, the pathways and our solutions that were needed. And really that story we were telling of shackles of slavery, gunboats of neoliberalism, violence of imperialism, and of course the noose of neoliberalism, this whole edifice that had been created both of the unjust world, but how these structural inequities amplified all these existing injustices and of course denied many people of the right to live with dignity and of course harmony with our planet. And whilst our voices for a long time may not have penetrated the corridors of power and decision making, they certainly are now, right? And I want to really pay tribute and recognise the work of all of those people, some of whom are no longer in these spaces, but who have done that heavy lifting. And, you know, I still remember that 15 years ago when we first started talking about the word justice transition, laying it out, what would it mean, you know, how we would deepen our exchanges, what kind of story we'd weave together, the portal which we would try and create the world that we all know we need to create. And through those years, you may have seen various iterations, even at the COP, talk about the people's demands, and then we moved the dial, talking about global Green New Deals, visions birthed in different territories, Eco-Social Pact, Feminist Green New Deal, the Justice Transition Alliance, all of them on this praxis of both investigating, collaborating and imagination through this global network of partners and social movements. And that ecology of connections, that's been built, rooted in decades of work together, of trust and of acknowledgement of the tasks that we face, is really needed when we think about the stories we need to both weave together to tell the stories of the past, the present, and of course the future. And importantly, the power we need to build together, right? If we want to really challenge these injustices. And I don't have time, but our movements have come up with what the 4 tests are about: fair shares on 1.5, about tackling inequality and poverty, about living in balance and harmony with our planet, but also uprooting the systems of oppression, racialized and gendered and structural that are baked into our system, and how those play out both in the UN space and beyond. And I want to pay tribute, of course, in the global north. The climate strikers and the Black Lives Matter movement have significantly shifted the dial in and the patient and principled work that many of us have done to shift that public and political discourse in the global north. And of course, that has begun to influence both funding strategies and spark deeper conversations like the one we're having about both the culture within philanthropy. And we all want to see this change. And many of us, of course, have long been said we need to connect issues. We need to connect the struggles against structural racism, about gender, or about embedded systems of economic justice, as well as climate injustice, and the movements that we need to build, the new ones, but also the existing ones, how they need to be resourced and given a place at the table. And I want to thank Farhana for very much making sure that we are at this table and our voices are here. I know many of you are really eager to be part of this conversation, and I recognise some of you have already started work on this, whether it's through the Edge Funders Network and the movement working group that we've been established in there, creating dialogue between movements and funders. You know, what is it we're working together, each playing our role, and creating the tapestry of the movement we need for system change. I would just want to end by saying the overtone window is open. We all recognise that. The question is now, how do we ensure it doesn't shut? And how do we ensure that building back isn't building back the same? How do we turn not just from crisis to crisis, but crisis to justice? And we all have our place, but this really is a moment for us to be really bold and really more braver than we've ever been before, because we have to leave behind what's failed before, and we have to grasp this moment. And I would just want to end, Rebecca Solnit says, you know, hope is not a lottery ticket that you clutch sitting on the sofa. Hope is the axe in which you break down the emergency door. And really, we together have to be that axe that at this critical moment. So thank you, Farhana, and thank you to, for the invitation to be here today.
Well, Tasneem and Azad are inspired, and you know, I see them as my mentors. And I want to say on their behalf, they haven't said it, but you know, organisations led by black and brown people do not get the kind of funding with the ease. That is a proven fact. Our studies are now showing that. You know, sometimes you need studies, but our lived experience is now being understood. And I hope that, you know, as we continue our conversations, there will be a change in who is funded and who is core funded and who is given the benefit of the doubt when they decide a risky strategy, and when they decide they want to pick up the axe, they get supported. So thank you very much. Over to you, Kate, for the final comments. I know we're running a little bit behind, but we will adjust the programme and make sure those who need to leave can leave. Thank you.
Hello, I'll try and be quick. Thank you, Farhana. I work for a foundation that has the name Children in the title, so you would expect us to be deeply concerned about intergenerational justice, and we are, and we've been funding via our grantees youth movements. Some of the people are here today. Climate Emergency Collaboration Group, the Urban Movements Innovation Fund, European Climate Foundation, and FILE, which supports litigation where children are the plaintiffs. You may have seen many of those cases. But it is indeed a drop in the ocean. And I just want to speak a little bit about my personal journey in philanthropy. I started as an activist at the age of 12 and worked my way through the NGO movement and all sorts of things, and have ended up in this extraordinarily privileged position. And I think it's really important to, I am the elephant. There are a few other elephants in this room, but philanthropy is the product of extreme wealth and privilege. Philanthropy doesn't exist without gajillionaires and billionaires. And it's really important to say that. It's really important to say that when you are the product, your work, your daily work is the product of extreme wealth. It's important to internalize that, and it's important to realize that every time you come to a table, you change the conversation. And I took over as CEO 6 years ago. And all of our staff were based in London, and most of them were white Anglo-Saxons with Ivy League master's degrees. And I was often in rooms talking about Africa with no Africans in the room, talking about India with no Indians in the room, talking about China with no Chinese in the room. And this is not okay. It's not okay. And so in my tiny and limited way, I am now happy that SIF, half the people in our staff, only half, but half is better than it was, now are from the countries where we do our work. And we have offices in Addis, Nairobi, Beijing, and Delhi. And those people also acknowledge that they are incredibly privileged within their own communities. They live in capitals, they're highly educated, they're highly mobile. And so every single shift that you make, you realize it's only the beginning of another shift that needs to be made. And I think it's really important that we start to acknowledge much more seriously the value of lived experience, and that every conversation has power dynamics, and we have to step back and recognize those. And at SIF, we're going on a learning journey, and Black Lives Matter, it's important to say, has been really, really crucial in bringing home to so many people in rich countries just how unfair things are. And I'm glad that Tasneem mentioned the issue of liability and historic responsibility. This sits behind all of it, and so we have to be very upfront about that. Just a couple of brief things. Today is Finance Day in the COP. and you will see lots of headlines in the Financial Times about trillions of dollars being mobilized, and isn't it wonderful? On the one hand, yes, it's wonderful that big financial institutions and corporations are recognizing that net zero matters. But my big question is, how does anyone access that money? How, with the system that we have, do we make any of that capital available to the people who actually need it? And they aren't just people who need it, they're actually people who are going to solve this problem. It's pretty obvious to anyone who's been paying attention to the climate fight over the last few decades, we can't solve the politics without affected communities in the room. We wouldn't have got the Paris Agreement without vulnerable countries. We would have got some crappy lowest denominator, excuse my language, G20 type agreement where everyone hides behind everybody else. Without vulnerable countries in the room, we would not have got the Paris Agreement. And we will not get high ambition, 1.5 compatible NDCs with the right levels of financing attached without affected communities leading the conversation, whether it's workers, whether it's women, whether it's indigenous communities. We're not going to win the politics. So this is not just a question of justice. For me, and this is the case I'm trying to make in my bizarre technocratic privileged world, this is also a question of impact. We will not solve climate unless we engage, unless we build the politics of change. We will get incremental change forever if we keep doing what we're doing, and we know that's not enough. We will only get transformational change. We will only win the politics of high ambition if the people who are most affected are in the room driving the conversation. And that means that people like me have to spend less time talking and more time listening, and that we need to recognize that there are power inequalities in every single conversation on climate change, whether it's in this room with me here speaking and not many other people, or whether it's in the COP, and whether it's in capitals around the world. And we see this everywhere. This isn't just a climate problem. It also works on gender and sexual reproductive health, on malnutrition, on neglected tropical diseases. These are all issues where these inequalities are abundantly clear, and issues of power matter. So I would just say we are at the stage now where this is an everyone, everywhere, now problem. Everybody has a role to play, and all I can do in this meeting is promise my own self-awareness in terms of my role in this conversation, and continue to do whatever work I can to support others and try and bring with me the vast wall of capital that I have access to, and that is being talked about today. For those of you who are around from Philanthropy in this room, we're having a meeting with the Youth Advisory Group of the Secretary General to talk about empowering youth groups and climate justice, and supporting and building the capacity of youth groups this afternoon. So I hope some of you will join us there. Thank you very much.
I'm going to move to here, so I can say thank you, looking at our incredible panel. All of them actually have done decades of work on climate justice and making the transition to a better world. So I really want to salute you and hope that you'll come back and collect the gift. This is a mystery thing that I alluded to earlier. In fact, this is the seed from that mystery gift that you're going to, I hope, come back and collect. And I want to ask Kate, especially, as she's a long dear friend, but also our communicator and power connector, to please convey what you have heard to all of those in the big philanthropies, in the donor communities, to the COP presidency. And I hope that we can get you to commit to what I remember us committing to when I joined CIF, which was originally, let's get 100 million out of the door per year in climate philanthropy. You've exceeded that. So can you set yourself that goal by the end of this COP? Please, can we get a big sum of money, especially for loss and damage? And we have the funding institutions ready to receive it, whether it's the new Climate Justice Resilience Fund, whether it's the CVF Fund, whether it's the hundreds of organizations that are already in that database that we showed you at the beginning. People are ready to move, and if that would be the biggest signal of hope that you could send to mobilize that. So please help us with the incredible energy and power that you have, I know. So I'm going to just take a minute for you to thank our brilliant panel, allow them to get back to wherever they need to. And we're going to have a short, not really a break. We've decided not to have a proper coffee break or anything because of COVID reasons. You can't all mill around going to the cafe. Those of you who need to take a bio break, please do. There's going to be a song interlude, and then I'll invite the other panel, the panelists to come, and we're going to reverse the age order there. So we're going to have our youngest member of that panel speak first. So please thank the panelists. Thank you. Moderate the next panel. So have a little shift, but also I think this is where we're having the song and the cartoon interlude. Thank you.
For those who are curious, we're not going to have a song, but you should have a chance to check in on the cartoons at this juncture. If you look around near you, there will be a set of cartoons on paper. And for those joining us on video, take a look at the cartoon gallery. Click on that cartoon URL again. You should be able to see how some of the cartoons are evolving. And see what you can find. See if you have additional comments to share. Make some remarks there so that our cartoon artists can join us and can reflect some of what you're thinking as they finalize their work.
We're going to get started with this panel. If anyone wants to take a seat.
So you're only going to be speaking one at a time. Yeah, but I need to translate what Calfin said. It's that West Africa. An extra mic.
Right. Can everyone take their seats so we can get going with the next panel?
Yeah. Yeah. I just need people to sit down. We need an extra mic. Okay.
So we've got a great hybrid panel today, representing grassroots movements, women-led social movements, indigenous communities, youth activists, and I'm really excited to hear and learn from their experiences and their learnings from the front line. We're also going to be taking some questions from the crowd and people online, so if you've got any questions, please do join Slido, which was previously up on screen and now isn't. And we've got some videos to show you as well from our panelists who couldn't join us today, and we'll be playing those at the end of this panel here. And I'd love to start off with Vanessa. You've recently been featured on the front cover of Time magazine, so congratulations for that. And you've got a book that you've just released as well, which is a manifesto of your fight and your story so far about struggles of being heard in this climate movement. And I'd love to hear from you about what the biggest challenges have been in having your voice heard in this climate movement and having African voices heard in the climate movement.
Thank you so much. I think the biggest challenge is really being in a system or setting that doesn't let you be heard. So it's not like we are not speaking, we are actually speaking. Many times we've been called missing voices or voiceless, but we have been speaking. But the system decides who should be listened to and who shouldn't be listened to. And I've seen many of the activists experience this, especially from the most affected areas, with having a challenge of their voices being amplified or their voices being platformed. And even those who are, able to be in conferences or to speak at conferences, their first experiences when even in the place where the platform has been given, there is still an erasure. I can give my own personal experience in Davos when I was at a press conference, and when the news article published about the press conference, I was removed from the picture and also from the article. And that same experience is something that has happened even in the past days. And some people have seen it. And it's the media continuously removing activists from the most affected areas, in the news that they are reporting. Activists from MAPA organized a press conference, and media wasn't asking questions. They weren't asking questions, and this was really challenging for activists because usually at a press conference, after the activist speaking, media has to ask questions, and they weren't asking the MAPA activist questions, which was very challenging because again, it's another space of denying a platform or a media platform for them to tell their personal stories. So I think that the challenge is not who is speaking and who isn't speaking, because many activists are speaking. But the challenge is who is listening to them, who is ready to listen to us, who is ready to platform our voices, who is ready to platform our experiences. And it's been hard for people to understand, and it's not just with the media, it's also with organizations, I should say. And what I've really seen with organizations is when they invite you, they want to frame how your speech should be. And even that is erasure of what you really want to talk about. They want to frame your story. They want to, decide on what you should speak about and what you shouldn't speak about. And other experiences, we've seen and had organizations talk about claims of diversity, inclusion of, let me say, African voices. But I can give still from my own personal experiences. When I receive some of the invitations to maybe speak at events or to do interviews, and I am not able to do that, and I ask that another activist does that, there are always questions of how eloquent are they? Have they spoken before? What is their social media so we can see the work that they have been doing? And sometimes an activist is not given that space to tell their story because according to the organization, they're not eloquent enough. So their presence or their value is put on how eloquent they are and not on their story and their experience. And again, still with organizations, I've really been putting a question mark when organizations say they want to have activists from Africa in their events, because it now looks like they just want to show that there is an African in their event, but it's not really a place of fully including those voices. I've also had experiences where an organization is ready to pay for my travels, to pay for my accommodation, but if I can't do it and another activist needs to do it, in that moment, the organization remembers that they care about carbon footprint. So the organization, the activist has to attend online. Yeah, so they feel like they cannot put their expenses on certain activists if they are to attend their conferences. So those are some of the challenges that I've seen in my activism, and I think they are really hindering the voices of different activists from being amplified. And yet every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. However, with all this question of who should be, which specific activist should be at the event or should do this interview, I feel like we only keep moving steps backward.
Thank you. That sounds like That sounds like the extreme end of tokenization. It's so thank you for sharing so generously. I'd love to move on to Calfin, part of the MINGA delegation. It's, for those of you who don't know, it's a collective of indigenous people from across the continent of the Americas. So from Alaska to the southern tip of South America. So talking about kind of what Vanessa has been touching upon with voices not being heard, what do you think are the consequences of indigenous voices not being heard and valued in this climate movement?
Bueno, agradeciendo mucho los tiempos que nos permiten a todos conocernos y reconocernos. Es el primer paso si queremos todos transitar hacia el nuevo paradigma que nos exigen estos tiempos.
Feeling very grateful for the times and the space which have allowed us to be here together. It's the first step to move towards finding solutions.
Saludando primero a los espíritus de esta tierra,
First of all, greeting the spirits of this land,
a los espíritus que representan ustedes su historia y sus tradiciones,
to the spirits that represent your stories and your traditions,
sus abuelos que hicieron posible que ustedes sean y materialicen los seres que son hoy y que trabajen en las áreas que hoy trabajan.
your elders who have permitted and have allowed for you to be here in order to work on the areas that you are working in.
Sus padres y cada ser que le entregó la semilla en su corazón que permite que hoy sean los seres que desarrollan esta labor importante para el cuidado de todos como humanidad y todo el planeta y todo el universo.
Thanking your parents who have planted a seed in your hearts, which has allowed for you to be working together and moving forwards.
Nada es casualidad y no por nada estamos aquí todos juntos.
Nothing is a mere of chance. It's not a casuality that we're here all together.
Solidarizamos, por supuesto, con todas las formas, con todas las maneras y toda nuestra historia y toda también nuestra resiliencia.
We are feeling compassion and we are feeling for our families and the people that we are here representing and that are listening to us.
Todos aquí traemos historias.
Everyone here are bringing stories.
Vamos a buscar la manera de contarlas de la manera que podamos construir, de contribuir a un futuro de toda la sociedad, de toda la humanidad.
We are going to find the best ways of telling these stories in a way that they can contribute to our future and to our society.
Es el tiempo de dejar de vernos desde diferentes territorios, fronteras. Hay que dejar de verse desde nuestras religiones, desde nuestro color de piel, desde lo que cada uno el colonialismo moderno le entregó hasta hoy. Y tenemos que ser capaces de entre todos generar una conciencia colectiva para trascender el importante desafío que tenemos hoy como humanidad, que es cuidar nuestra madre y respetarnos primero nosotros.
It is time for us to let go and move past boundaries and borders, religions, and the colors of our skin. It is a time for all of us to come together and work towards humanity as a whole and in the interest of everyone.
Desde tanta diferencia, muchos de los de aquí nos conocemos varios años.
And speaking of differences, in fact, some of the people here, we've known each other for many years now.
Y desde puntos tan diferentes hemos sido capaces de reconocernos como hermanos, como compañeros de camino y aprender unos de otros.
And although we come from different places and areas, we have been able to recognize each other and collaborate together.
Para estar hoy día aquí pasamos procesos dolorosos.
In order to be here, we've had to go through very hurtful processes.
La filantropía y los pueblos indígenas ha sido un proceso dificultoso.
Both indigenous peoples and philanthropy has been a difficult process.
Porque venimos de enseñanzas colonialistas.
Because we're coming from colonialist models.
Porque sentimos que estos o cuales modelos son mejores para tales o cuales espacios territoriales tradicionales que son completamente diferentes.
Because we identify that model or this model is better for solving that issue or that other.
Nosotros crecimos sin zapatos y crecimos en la naturaleza conversando con los espíritus.
We grew up without shoes and we grew up speaking in direct communication with the spirits of our lands.
Somos primeras generaciones que aprendemos a leer y escribir en nuestras comunidades y que podemos conocer la educación. Nuestros padres no leen ni escriben.
We are the first generation who are able to read and write and to be able to speak in the language that we're using here today. Our parents don't know how to speak or write in this language.
Y rápidamente, gracias a nuestro trabajo, a nuestros líderes, también al mundo de la filantropía que hace posible que hoy día lleguemos a este espacio y podamos conocernos y reconocernos.
And most importantly, thank you thanking the philanthropists here and philanthropy in general who have made it possible for us to be here and to be able to recognize each other and to work together.
Y falta mucho por aprender aún, no es un camino corto, no lo vamos a terminar nosotros, pero vamos a dejar plantada esa semilla en las futuras generaciones, en sus futuras generaciones.
And it's a long path. And what we're doing here is planting the seed that will take us to the future generation, your future generations.
Hoy hablaba con los niños de los colegios aquí que protegen las ballenas y desde un lugar tan lejano nosotros hablábamos sobre lo mismo y veía el brillo de sus ojos y ahí yo veía la esperanza y el futuro. No somos quizás nosotros, van a ser ellos.
Today I was speaking with young kids from schools here and they're looking after whales and even coming from such a far away place. I saw the brightness in their eyes and I saw the hope in them.
Hoy la ciencia, el arte y la tecnología de la mano pueden contribuir a dar un gran paso a lo que nosotros como humanidad necesitamos.
Today, art, science, and technology are tools that allow us to give a very large step into the next.
Y es todo juntos.
And it's all together.
Nadie puede quedar atrás. Nosotros en toda nuestra diversidad, que no es solo cultural, también es biológica, también es sexual, el género, es muy importante el rol de la mujer en nuestros procesos internos. También tenemos nosotros mismos nuestros propios desafíos con respecto a la propia discriminación interna que tenemos.
And it's all together. It's also an intersectional process where gender, sexuality, indigenous women are very integral to all the work that they do.
Pero estamos todos al servicio, todos queremos hacerlo bien, todos queremos mejorar y vamos a aprender juntos de este camino y nos vamos a acompañar de buena manera.
But we're all not together. We're not alone in this process. We're all together and we're going to hand by hand and we're going to move forward together.
Traemos un bulto histórico, traemos un dolor histórico, donde nos separaron, donde nos segmentaron y los clasificaron. Ahora tenemos la maravillosa oportunidad de volver a encontrarnos, de volver a reconocernos partes de un todo, tanto con el planeta, con los espacios biodiversos y entre nosotros como humanidad también.
We bring a baggage. Our past is one of pain, where we've been segmented, we've been displaced, but now we are in a position where we can come together again and identify with ourselves, with everything else, with everyone else, with biodiversity.
Debemos volver al centro como nuestros abuelos rezaron en el fuego a través de una pipa. ¿Alguna vez los viejos rezaron y soñaron que entre tantas diferencias no íbamos a volver a encontrar en algo que nos fuera común? Y hoy día eso se está dando. Yo tengo mucha fe en eso, tengo mucha esperanza en eso. Y lo hago con mucho amor también, porque el amor y la paz es el camino que nos va a llevar a conducir un mejor espacio para todos.
And we have to go back to the hearth of the fire, like our elders did, and to listen and to really work together, and I find hope in that.
Yo les deseo lo mejor para ustedes, su vida y sus territorios.
I wish the very best to you, to your territories, and for your lives.
Todo está unido. Cualquiera de esos espacios que esté con dolor va a ser doloroso para el otro también.
Everything is united. Whatever is hurtful to one is hurtful for the other.
Mientras un pueblo esté sufriendo, mientras un pueblo no tenga agua, mientras no tenga respeto a sus territorios, mientras esté militarizado, mientras sufra violencia estatal y mientras las personas miren y observen y trabajen solo en lo que quieren y no quieran tocar otros temas, no vamos a solucionar nada.
If there are groups that are hurt and who are lacking water, or they're being militarized, or they can't meet their needs, other groups will also be going through those hardships.
Todos somos importantes.
We are all important.
No olvidemos a nadie.
Let's not forget anyone.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vanessa, I know you've got to leave in a few minutes, so if you need to walk off stage, that's fine, but thanks for joining us today. And Calfin, I'm not sure if you also need to leave, but feel free to. I know you've got stuff on. And thank you for underpinning everything with a message of love and peace and togetherness. I think that's what's going to get us through this period. And so Salim, you're an expert in kind of working with vulnerable countries, and you've been to all COPs from what I hear. So I'd love to hear from you a bit about how you've seen the conversation around climate justice change and evolve over time, and what work do you think is still left to do, which is a lot of work left to do from a philanthropic angle?
Thank you very much, Aditya, and thank you for inviting me. So let me start by describing myself a little bit in the terms that you just asked me. I come to these COPs every year, and you're right, this is my 26th COP. I've been to every single one of them. I come not just for the 2 weeks of the COP. I've been in Glasgow now a whole week. I come for 3 weeks. The first week being the preparations for the COP, and then the next 2 weeks being the COP itself. And I come suited in my body armor. This is I wear for the COPs. I don't wear this at home when I work. So 3 weeks in the year, I come here and I battle here. But 49 weeks in the year, I don't talk about COPs and negotiations. I'm working with vulnerable communities back in vulnerable countries, not just in my country, Bangladesh, but in many other vulnerable countries in Asia and Africa, where I've been working for the last 20, 30 years with them. Understanding the problems of climate change, helping them deal with those problems of climate change. And we used to call them vulnerable communities. I don't do that anymore. I call them the first adapters. They're adapting to the impacts of climate change now as we speak. That's the change in reality that's happened. And I hope that that reality change filters into this particular COP26. It hasn't done in the past, but maybe here we can make that happen. That reality is climate impacts are happening as we speak. They're going to get worse in time. We're not going to get better. The only thing we can achieve is to not make them a hell of a lot worse in the long-term future. But the next 10 years, bad is happening. Not stoppable, not avoidable. It's going to happen. Who's going to suffer? Poor people. Even in rich countries, poor people. You know, 50 people died from the floods in New York recently from Hurricane Ida. They're all poor people living in basements. No rich people died, all right? Even in the United States of America. So this issue of loss and damage affecting the most vulnerable communities in every country, but then in the poorer countries in Asia and Africa, Latin America, there are very many more of them. My country, Bangladesh, has millions of them. Is something that we need to address in these global meetings. These are the only places where we have an opportunity to do that, and we have to make the most of that opportunity. All of us. Some of us can, you know, we get our badges and get into the blue zone. We need to do it there. Those that don't need to go to the blue zone or outside, they need to do it there. But as we just heard, we need to connect with each other. We need to use our common humanity as the basis for the discussions. Unfortunately, our leaders don't do that. They don't listen. And as Vanessa said, it isn't a matter of getting voices heard. If they're not going to listen, then what's the point of even getting it heard? We listen to each other. We are listening, but they aren't. And so, you know, we're going to have to find better ways of making them listen by being more strategic, by being more effective, by being more political, as Kate said. And the philanthropy world, in my view, would be missing a beat. So let me give you my little caveat, if you like, on the term climate justice, which I'm absolutely in favor of, but I have a preferred term, which is climate injustice. Justice is an ideal that we want to get to. Injustice is something staring you in the face. It's happening. It's manifest injustice. And so my question is, are you going to deal with that? That's the elephant in the room. So if you talk about vaguely about climate justice and just transitions, I have no problem with that. But I challenge you, and I challenged the Scottish government recently to say this. If you use the word climate justice, what are you doing on loss and damage to help the victims of climate change? And you have a climate justice fund. Why don't you make that into a loss and damage fund? And I'm very pleased to see that Nicola Sturgeon listened, and they put £1 million into the pot to start the ball rolling. And that's a great thing. That's leadership. That's true leadership. And I hope the philanthropists will rise to the same challenge. So my challenge to any philanthropy foundation that uses the term climate justice is, what are you going to do about climate injustice? And the proof of the pudding is put some money in the loss and damage fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm unfortunately going to have to bring this to a close because we're out of time. Oh, God, thank you. We've got 2 videos from our virtual panelists who I was silly enough to forget. If we could, Kevin, if we could put those videos on screen, that'd be great. We've got Stella Henry joining us from the Eastern and Southern African Small Scale Farmers Forum, talking about requests to COP from a smallholder farmer perspective. We've also got Gaddafi Dange from the Wairo Commission speaking to us from India.
The world these days is more affected by climate change. Smallholder farmers are even affected more, that they cannot plan well in their production and get even produce. This calls for climate justice, which is a form of environmental justice and fair treatment of all people, and the freedom from discrimination in all projects and policies that addresses climate change. I am speaking from an organization called ESAF, whose headquarters is in Morogoro, Tanzania. ESAF is a network of small-scale farmers forum in Eastern and Southern Africa. It works in 16 countries in ESA region, 6 countries in East Africa Community, and 10 countries in SADC. ESAF is made up of a membership of 2.1 million smallholder farmers. It's a farmer-initiated, farmer-led, and farmer-owned. ESAF has successfully influenced policies in East African level. This has resulted to the declaration of implementing Malabo in East Africa Community. Further, ESAF has influenced policies in SADC's strategic plan that takes its aspirations from smallholders. But also ESAF has influenced policies in the 16 countries that we are working in, and this has increased visibility of small-scale farmers in the policy dialogues, where now they are invited to share their voices on the policies and the budgets as far as agriculture is concerned. ESAF views agroecology as a sustainable, holistic, and cost-effective approach, harmony with ecosystems, and also preserves permaculture local conditions and resilient to climate change. In ESAF, we say agroecology covers crops and livestock production, agroforestry, and it integrates landscapes and natural resources management, including water and biodiversity. It produces food, fiber, raw materials, and ecological services sustainably and good for human health. And here's the good news. ESAF is expecting to hold a webinar in the end of November 2021 that will bring in 200 farmers in Africa. It will be discussing on agroecology as a transformative approach to an equitable and climate resilient on agricultural development in Eastern and Southern Africa. The webinar will take place in 15 hours in the afternoon, Central Europe time or Southern Africa time, to accommodate participants from North America. The webinar is organized by ESAF, Eastern and Southern Africa Small Scale Farmers Forum, with SAD, Southern Africa Trust, together with Climate Justice and Just Transition Donor Collaborative. This webinar is also expected to link to the ongoing COP26. And so we are grateful that donors are ready to work with us in this webinar and so many others to come, so that farmers can have a say as far as climate change is concerned and enhance their resilience looking forward. Please do reach us through our website. Thank you.
मेरा नाम उदौरी है, मैं फेडरेशन की सेक्रेटरी हूँ, वायरो कमीशन की मेंबर हूँ। हमारे फेडरेशन में 7000 महिला मेंबर है। हमारा जो सीआरएफ फंड है, तो ये फंड जैसा कि आपत्ति के बाद महिलाओं को जो दिक्कत आती है, तो ये दिक्कत में काम करने के लिए हम हमारा सीआरएफ फंड यूज करते हैं। जो सीआरएफ फंड है, ये फंड लेके ड्रिप करना है, जो वेल है कि वेल का रिचार्ज करना है, और जो जिसके पास कम पानी है, तो कम पानी में हम कैसा सब्जी लेके वो उनका फैमिली का पूरा मैनेजमेंट करना है। तो ये इसके लिए हम हमारे महिलाओं को फंड देते हैं, और हम जो ये सीआरएफ फंड है, तो पूरा महिला ही मैनेज करते हैं कि हमारे फेडरेशन के महिला है। हम ज्यादा इतना नहीं ये करते कि जैसा बैंक है, फाइनेंस है, उधर बहुत सारे डॉक्यूमेंट लेना पड़ता है, बहुत बार जाना पड़ता है। तो हम हमारे महिलाओं को कितना सहज वो पैसा मिलना चाहिए। तो ये हम पहले उनको अवेयरनेस करते हैं, उसके बाद एप्लीकेशन लेते हैं। एप्लीकेशन आने के बाद फेडरेशन वो चेक करता है एप्लीकेशन, और उसके बाद हम हमारे फंड मैनेजमेंट कमेटी में हम उनको जो निधि देना है, कितना देना है, कौन से चीज के लिए देना है, कितने टाइम के लिए देना है, उनके साथ हम महिलाओं के साथ डिस्कशन करते हैं और उनको ये पैसा दे देते हैं। महाराष्ट्र में जो आपत्ति है कि जैसा ड्राउट है, ड्राउट 2012 से 15 तक बहुत बड़ा ड्राउट था, इसलिए हमने एक स्टडी किया था कि सर्वे किया था, और सर्वे में ऐसा निकल के आया था कि जैसा महिलाओं को खाने के लिए अच्छा नहीं मिल रहे, और पूरा फैमिली के लोगों को भी, जैसा बच्चे हैं उनको भी खाने के लिए नहीं मिल रहे। तो महिलाओं ने क्या किया है कि हम उनका ट्रेनिंग भी दिया है कि कितने कम पानी कम टाइम में वो सब्जी लेके, ये तो उनका पूरा फैमिली में भी वो सब्जी जब खाते हैं तो उनका न्यूट्रिशन भी बहुत अच्छे से होता है। उसके साथ हमने जो न्यूट्रिशन का जो 1 एकड़ मॉडल भी किया था उसमें, कि कम से कम 25 टाइप के सब्जियां उन महिलाओं ने लिया था। तो ये लेने के लिए दो उसमें फायदे हो गए कि एक तो उनके घर में खाने के लिए तो मिला, और उनका पैसा भी बचत हो गई उस टाइम में। अच्छा न्यूट्रिशन का जो भी ऑर्गेनिक सब्जी महिलाओं ने लेके हेल्थ भी बीमार भी नहीं पड़े। महिलाओं ने उनके गांव में भी बेच दिया है, तो बेचने के बाद महिलाओं के हाथ में पैसा दिया है। तो सब महिलाओं ने उनके घर के सामने किचन गार्डन लगाया, तो उसका क्या हो गया कि तुरंत उनके खाने के लिए पैसा मिला, सब्जी मिला। हमारा जो फेडरेशन है कि जैसा उस्मानाबाद डिस्ट्रिक्ट में 2 फेडरेशन है, तो 2 फेडरेशन से हम उस्मानाबाद डिस्ट्रिक्ट में पूरा तो अभी तक कि 1.5 कोटी तक हमने फंड दिया है, और 5000 महिलाओं को हमने फंड दिया है। और जो भी एसएसपी का पूरा डिस्ट्रिक्ट अलग अलग डिस्ट्रिक्ट है कि 50,000 महिलाओं को 4 कोटी तक हमने फंड दिया है।
Great. Thank you for listening. We've got a lovely performance coming up by Manuela Benin. So Manuela, the stage is yours.
It's been so long since your first breath. I hold you in my heart. It's been so long since your first breath. I hold you in my heart. You needed water, I gave you the sea. You needed shelter, I gave you the tree. You needed fire, I showed you the sun. You needed air to breathe, to breathe, to breathe. I give you all I have, but you always want more. I give it freely to you, but you always want more.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to say very much because that was so remarkable, except to say through the work that I've been doing on climate justice and just transition, I've learned increasingly sometimes our artists, our song, our musicians, performance artists are needed to help hold all the emotions that we are going through, to help us connect through the heart. So we've tried in little ways, through the letters that are under your chairs, through the gifting of the seed, through the gift of song, to hear the voices that are needed, the different ways in which we communicate with and through each other. And I just want to say a thank you. And that was a fantastic way in which the voice of Mother Earth was here today, speaking to you. So let me introduce you now to our moderator, Laura Garcia, who is the President and CEO of Global Green Grants. And we've given her the really difficult job of chairing and being the moderator of the last panel of the day. There will be a reception afterwards where you can all mingle, all chat. Excellent canapes. Thank you, ScottishPower, for that. And we will have to exit this auditorium very promptly at 4:30. So just putting you a little bit on notice of things to come this afternoon. We'll have lots and lots of time to chat. But I'm asking Laura to come and introduce herself, her work a little bit, to connect all the different ways in which philanthropy can support practitioners and others working here, and ask the panel members to be ready and to come join us on the stage. Thank you. Over to you, Laura.
Hello. Would my fellow speakers please come and join me? Thank you. I'm Laura Garcia. I'm the President and CEO of Global Green Grants Fund. We are an international organization working to promote environmental and social justice around the world. We give grants globally, and it's my pleasure to be invited here to the very difficult task, like it was said, in 50 minutes to give the voice to everyone here and make sure that we leave the room on time. So we'll try to be brief and succinct if possible. Thank you. Okay. So we have lots of voices to hear, as you can see. The philanthropic sector, are we all here? Oh my goodness. See how difficult? Okay. And there's actually another speaker that I don't have, well, I haven't met you all in person, so you'll let me know if I'm missing somebody in my introductions. The philanthropic sector is in constant change, but rarely do we get to see the extraordinary moment that we're experiencing today with new donors, new pledges, new collaboratives and modalities of funding for climate justice and just transition. With us, sorry, I'm removing this. With us, we have a combination of donors who have been supporting climate justice initiatives for years. We also have new foundations and initiatives that are being created just as we speak, as well as other funders from the Global South. Some of them we haven't met before. So the purpose of this session is really to learn from each other, from what we're doing, but also for all of us to start understanding and have a clear picture of what this new funding landscape looks like. To start understanding as well, what are the implications of what we're seeing in the work of climate justice and just transition. My personal and perhaps also institutional aspiration as Global Green Grants is to also make sure that we don't co-opt and capture the words of climate justice and just transition in our work, that we don't, even if it's not intentional, start co-opting these words and instrumentalizing movements, and that we really pay attention to the meaning of injustice, like the other fellow speakers have been mentioning before. For that, we really need to understand what we are doing and get to the why and get to the how, and not just speak about these words as if they don't, as if everything means the same, because it doesn't mean the same. And we know that philanthropy has been also embedded in systems of oppression. And if we don't pay attention to power, we're going to take the risk or make the risk of repeating things that haven't worked before. We have heard today about political commitments, experiences, and learnings. Now it's time to look at this landscape and understand the shifts, the implications, the opportunities, but also the challenges that arise from a context of these new philanthropies and new pledges happening today and recently. So let me start with Kevin from Ford Foundation. You have, well, actually, sorry, let me just introduce everybody, and please raise your hands whomever I'm not introducing, because I just had in my list 7 speakers. Okay, so we have with us Athena Ronquillo Ballesteros from the Climate Foundation Initiative, Climate Leadership Initiative, I'm sorry. We have Kevin Curry from the Ford Foundation and Climate and Land Use Alliance, CLUA. We have Maria Francisca Cortés Solari from the Chilean Founder of Indigenous Leaders at Mairi Foundation. We have Jessica Sueiran from Synchronicity Earth. We have Usma Sulaiman from Community Jamel, Carol Excel from Bezos Earth Fund, and Liz McKeown from IKEA Foundation. Am I missing somebody? Oh, the translator, okay. I have been tasked with improvising, as you can see. Okay, let's start then with Kevin from Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation is part of the $1.7 billion pledge that you have just heard yesterday in support of indigenous peoples and local communities. Kevin, what are you planning to do about it?
Thank you. That very simple question. Yeah, we're thrilled to be part of a group of 21 funders that announced yesterday a commitment of $1.7 billion for Indigenous and local community forest tenure rights and forest guardianship. And I want to thank SIF and Oak, who are here and also part of that pledge. It's important because we know that stopping and reversing tropical deforestation is an essential part of the climate solution. It's the if tropical deforestation was a country, it would be the 3rd largest source of emissions. And even if we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow, emissions from tropical deforestation would be enough to push us over the 1.5 degree threshold. So if we're talking about keeping 1.5 degrees alive, the first place to look for that is tropical forests. And if we're talking about tropical forests and keeping them standing, the first people to look to are the communities living in and managing those forests. And the evidence has become overwhelming that forests are most likely to remain standing when local people have secure rights to those forests and those rights are defended. So here's an interesting case where social justice requires that we recognize the land rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, but stopping climate change also requires that. And so there's a nice convergence here where we're able to bring together funders interested in social justice, funders interested in forests, funders interested in climate, to come together and commit to investing in what's become a proven solution for climate change that will also deliver social justice outcomes. So we have 1.7 billion. How do we actually get that to the ground, to communities who are doing the real work of protecting tropical forests? And we think there's a couple of ways to do that. One is by making direct investments in indigenous and community networks who are representing forest owners and managers around the world. And we work with a group that's called the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities that represents communities managing more than 800 million hectares of forests across Latin America, Africa and Asia. So direct investments in groups on the ground is one strategy. Secondly, we're interested in strengthening intermediaries who are working effectively with Indigenous people and local community organizations, and Global Green Grants is one example of the kind of intermediary that's doing things right, that is listening to local voices and using those voices to inform their grant-making decisions, and distributing power across and resources across geographies in ways that are really responsive to local demands. So that's the second strategy. Third thing that we're interested in is developing community-managed funds. And there's some really interesting examples of those kinds of funds that have emerged from Brazil and other places, where forest owners and managers have come together to create a fund with a governance structure made up of local people from communities, who are able to accept resources and then decide totally for themselves how to invest those resources in ways that not only protect forests, but also help with cultural revitalization, help with improving livelihoods, developing a long-term vision for community well-being. And then fourth, we think there's still a role for NGOs in the global north who want to play a supportive, accompanying role with forest peoples movements. But that role has to look very different than it's looked in the past. And so we're also interested in working with our partners in the global north to help them rethink how they provide support in a way that really is responsive to the needs of communities on the ground, but that also recognizes that those communities are in a place now where they're able to speak for themselves and to demand direct access to decision makers and to funding. So it's actually quite a small step that we've taken. You may have seen that yesterday 100+ countries committed to ending deforestation by 2030, and that a total of 19 billion has been mobilized for that effort. So our 1.7 billion is about 8% of that. It's more than the 1% of funding that communities living in and around forests are currently getting. But we know that Indigenous peoples and local communities manage half the world's land. And so they should be getting at least half of the funding that's going into land use change issues. So we have a long way to go, but we think it's an important step in the right direction.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm not going to comment between speakers because of time, so I'm going to quickly shift to Maria Francisca. Hello. The majority of funders here are based in the US or Europe. From today's conversations, how do you find your work in alignment or perhaps different? What are your main concerns about new funding streams? And what are the opportunities that you see today?
Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Después de estar trabajando 20 años en filantropía,
After working for 20 years in philanthropy,
que en algún momento era algo como muy distinto y no muy reconocido tampoco, por lo menos en mi país.
back in the day was something that wasn't very much recognized and not very known, at least in my country.
El hecho de poner solamente la palabra filantropía ya era algo cuestionable.
Just the fact of adding the word philanthropy into anything we did was already something that was questioned.
Pero nos sirvió en el fondo para empoderarnos y saber de que en realidad la filantropía es un tremendo aporte hoy en día para la humanidad y para todo lo que está pasando hoy en día con el cambio climático.
But it really helped us to feel empowered that it was something really important that we were doing and that we still do today for climate change and for humanity.
Con respecto a los pueblos originarios, que también ahí hemos tenido una gran experiencia.
And specifically with indigenous peoples, as we've had a really great experience.
Claro, me gustaría como tal vez recordar los ancestros y llamar a los ancestros.
I would like to take this opportunity perhaps to remember our ancestors and to welcome the ancestors.
Una de las cosas más urgentes que vimos cuando trabajamos con los pueblos originarios fue de que lo primero que nos teníamos que preocupar era de rescatar la historia de los cultores o las personas que llevaban la sabiduría.
One of the first things that we identified in terms of the needs that indigenous peoples had was to preserve and to keep the traditions alive and the history of those indigenous peoples.
Entendiendo de que los pueblos originarios tienen una historia con la naturaleza.
Understand that indigenous peoples have a history with nature.
Ellos son los que de alguna manera han aprendido a trabajar con las estaciones, han aprendido a trabajar con la tierra.
They are the ones who have learned to work with the seasons, with the land.
Y creo que es súper importante entender de que el alimento en el futuro va a ser algo que a lo mejor no lo estamos viendo ahora en esta COP26, pero el alimento va a ser un gran desafío para el mundo posteriormente.
And I see that food and food sovereignty is something that perhaps we're not really speaking about, and we don't see it as much at COP26, but it's something that is coming and that is going to be really important.
Y la maravilla que tienen los pueblos originarios es que ellos han conservado estas tradiciones ancestrales.
And the wonderful thing is that indigenous peoples have managed and have known how to keep the traditions alive, of ancestral traditions alive.
Donde nuestra preocupación fue en un primer momento rescatar y no olvidar cuáles eran los oficios.
Which for us the most important thing was to rescue and not forget what were the actual roles.
Porque pensamos que los oficios son como, es parte del futuro de la humanidad, sobre todo con lo que viene hoy en día, el valor de los oficios, de lo que... Eso.
Because we understand the importance of the different roles that are taken within the community and looking forward and moving forward, the importance of that.
Recién acabamos de terminar un proyecto en San Pedro de Atacama que duró 4 años con los pueblos originarios.
We just finished a work in San Pedro de Atacama.
Donde definimos 14 oficios.
Where we were able to identify 14 different roles.
Que fue algo bien importante porque esos oficios nos hacen retroceder también a la historia de nuestros antepasados y entender también de que nosotros no podemos dejar de olvidar también y rescatar esa memoria de los antepasados.
Which was really important because we were able to rescue and identify the memory and the history of our ancestors.
Y esos 14 libros ahora estamos preparando también con un trabajo que ya lleva 1 año y medio, donde estamos trabajando en un compilado de todo lo que tiene que ver con la agricultura y los pueblos originarios.
And through this work, there have been 12 publications that have been written with everything to do with agriculture and indigenous peoples.
Y tal vez eso era lo que yo quería como transmitir acá, de que no nos olvidáramos de los oficios, de que en el futuro tal vez vamos a tener que ser sobrevivientes.
And this is something that I really wanted to bring to the table, that let's not forget what the different roles are and are needed, because in the future we might need to step in to survive.
Y estoy segura que los pueblos originarios tienen las respuestas que no tienen los presidentes.
And I'm very confident and sure that indigenous peoples have the answers to those solutions that presidents don't have.
Tal vez pienso o sueño que en algún momento llegarán las personas a preguntarle a los líderes de los pueblos originarios cómo poder trabajar la tierra con los ciclos de la vida y la naturaleza.
And I dream and I hope that one day the leaders come and ask indigenous leaders how is it that they need to treat the land in harmony with the cycles and life of nature itself.
Entonces, en esta conversación quiero dejar como que tengamos presente los oficios.
So in this conversation, I want us to leave being very clear about the different roles that there are.
La importancia de la agricultura.
The importance of agriculture.
Y el otro gran problema es el tema de la semilla en el mundo que está siendo también, ¿cómo se dice? Fiscalizada, tomada.
And the other thing is seeds and how the importance of seeds moving forward.
Sí, está bien. Sí. Y contarte que en estas 3 reservas lo más importante que tenemos que son bancos de semillas de todo Chile.
And the most important thing is that we have reserves of and seeds from all of Chile preserved as well.
Y ese es el tesoro que queremos guardar y que queremos permanecer para el futuro.
And that's what we want to keep and to move towards the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias, María Francisca. Our next speaker is Jessica Sweden from Synchronicity Earth. Jessica, at Synchronicity Earth, you develop programs from the research that you create, and you also identify the funding gaps to create then your own strategies. Tell us, what are you seeing in this bigger frame, and why is it important to fund this way?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I feel particularly excited to be here because I feel like I'm wearing the biodiversity hat in the climate conference, which is really important, and it's wonderful to see fellow panelists speaking about it as well, and of course with their work that we all are thinking about with regard to Indigenous communities. For us, it's really about the how. The how are we going to allocate these large funds into these exceptional places? And in the gaps, we're seeing, areas of high biodiversity in things like amphibians, the Congo Basin, freshwater biodiversity, areas that are absolutely essential to our global biodiversity, to global health, that are overlooked by funding. And of course, in these areas, we have high Indigenous value. We've got local communities that are often working in these areas, and those end up being the places and the people that we support. And I think the key way in which we work at Synchronicity Earth is not unlike Global Green Grants, I don't think, but very much around finding organizations that are in those areas, so whether it's in the Congo Basin or in Papua New Guinea, who are local. They are developing their organizations. They need a huge amount of capacity building and support from organizations who are willing to take the time to work closely with them to develop metrics that are open, to think about how we evaluate and monitor, but in an acceptable way to different local contexts and community contexts and global contexts. And for us, it's really about trying to engage with those organizations to help to support them at the core, to think about how we bolster them, work with them on safeguarding, on financing, how they are reporting to their donors, how we start to then get pooled donors together. So we've got some really successful pooled funds that we've developed. And so for us, it's really about moving from the transactional in philanthropy into the relational and how we can help bridge that. So to bring some of the really chunky funding that's coming in and get it to the ground. But in order to do that, we have to bring up the local partners on the ground. And for us, there is no separation between biodiversity and cultural diversity. They are mutually enhancing. And we know this increasingly through the science and the data that's coming in. So for us, it's really just about looking at where the funding gaps are, where there are high areas of biodiversity, and thinking about how we build the capacity within those spaces. We really don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want new funding coming in, then having to create yet another funder initiative to try to do all the research. We want to help be a part of that giant Excel spreadsheet that we saw earlier. We have about 10 or 12 of those funders that are on that funding through us onto the ground. So, we are a bridge into those spaces. And I can see Farhana looking at me, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessica, for making my work easier. Our next speaker, and I hope I pronounce her name correctly, is Uzma Sulaiman. Okay. At Community Jamel, you take a collaborative approach, working with grassroots and international organizations as well. How do you collaborate with them exactly? What is in your view, the essential pieces of collaboration with grassroots for climate justice to be climate justice?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll keep it really short because I think we have to leave the vicinity at 4:30. So, so just a little bit about Community Jameel. We're an international philanthropic organization as part of the Jameel family, which have roots in Saudi Arabia. And we're about 20 years old, but it's only been in the last year that we added climate change. And the way we fund science. So we fund science to unlock breakthroughs for different areas of development, which now includes climate change. And when we added climate change, we decided to go through kind of the way we fund our partnership strategy and what is missing. What we noticed is that although kind of our remit was for the most vulnerable, pretty much 90% of our financing was going towards academic institutions, primarily in the UK and the US. And so we thought we need to change this. But with science, you fund the big bets. But you're not looking at local capacity in the same way. So you fund MIT. You fund Imperial College London. And so now that we've changed kind of our ways of working, and with climate change as well added to it, we've decided to fund more within the countries that we're looking at. So this year we've launched a big initiative in Nairobi, and our partnership model, our funding model has completely changed. The funding will go towards scientific institutions in Kenya, in collaboration with other academic institutions, but the main partner, where all the science is going to come from, is going to be out of Nairobi. It's going to be Kenyan scientists, Kenyan government, and Kenyan grassroots organizations as the leads, with just that partnership angle from University of Edinburgh this time, and Save the Children as well. And I think for us as an organization from the Global South, we just had to kind of do a bit of soul searching about, how are we building local capacity? Yes, we're trying to develop breakthroughs in science, but I think we also have to ensure that those breakthroughs originate from the countries where we're trying to do the most work. But I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Carol Excel from the Bezos Earth Fund. Carol, the Bezos Earth Fund is one of the big new funders in the field. We heard earlier today that now we have an ecology of movements and connections shifting the power of people to the people from demands of just transition, feminist New Deals, racial justice, climate justice. How are you ensuring that the fund does not repeat what hasn't worked before? And that the word justice, for example, is genuinely at the center of your work.
Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting us here. Thank you particular to Heather McGray for inviting me personally. I don't know where she is. Oh, there she is. And also providing advice to the Bezos Earth Fund so early in our journey. I think we really realize we're new in this space, and we're taking time to speak to other funders and carefully think about developing strategies both on nature and climate, which is the focus of the fund. Being such a big fund, that is a huge responsibility. And I think both the president, Andrew Stair, and also our chair, recognize that there is a need for care and due diligence in making decisions on funding. We are very much, at least at the beginning of this process, speaking to both environmental justice organizations and climate justice organizations to understand the needs and the needs of the movement, and also kind of where the gaps are. And that's been part of our journey that we will use to build into the strategy of the fund as it goes forward. We do not want to make mistakes. I mean, many people have said don't make mistakes from the past. And so the more I think that we can be very open to have dialogues and to really understand funders in this space, their priorities, and where the gaps are. So sort of what was just said, I think is going to be a really important part of the journey. So really excited to see the development of this map of organizations on climate justice. I think that'll be very helpful as the fund develops its own strategies, and really excited to look to support some of the very, very important groups who have been working in this space for so many years, and recognize that many of them, as has been said before, are underfunded, and to see what we can do in this space to make a difference. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Carol. Our next speaker is Liz McKeon from IKEA Foundation. Although IKEA Foundation has been here for some years, you are coming from the corporate sector, and the corporate sector is quite new in this type of funding and this type of grant making. How does a corporate donor address all of these framings?
Well, thank you so much. And it's lovely to be here, particularly in this company. I'm going to wing it a little bit on the spot because I didn't know this was going to be the question, but I'll start off by saying that we consider ourselves a strategic philanthropy, and labels and language are sort of what we're talking about here. But since we're also late in the day, I hope you'll permit me with a little levity to talk about something else, which I think is really fundamental to our endeavor and what we're hoping is the promise of our endeavor, and that is collaboration. And to borrow from an anecdote that a colleague once shared with me, and I will hopefully faithfully repeat, collaboration is a bit like teenage sex. If you're a parent, you're in denial and hoping it's not really happening because you are worried about the consequences of it. If you're a teen, you're probably not doing it well. And no matter which one you are hoping it is well protected and guarded, enjoyable, and that it does not lead to unintended consequences. And that is a bit of what we are all striving to do here. At IKEA Foundation, forget the teenage sex part, we're actually really, we thrive on what we call unprecedented collaboration. And one of the things that I've appreciated about the work that the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, my fellow funders, and Farhana have done is we've come together first in a lot of humility to ask ourselves, what is it that we don't know? And I think this mapping exercise is quite relevant. And just to bring it back and quickly to what your question was about that corporate lens, one of the things that I think is changing in philanthropy, and I hope we can honor as we go forward in this journey, is to get past something that we've always complained about, which is we don't have pipeline. You know, an investor will say, we need pipeline. Well, one of the things that this mapping, that this collaboration is doing is it is showing there is a dramatic and vast and treatable pipeline. And we have to bring ourselves into humility to address that and to bring scale and size to it. There is one other thing I'll say before passing on the microphone to another colleague, and that is I have been from the very beginning of this, and when I say beginning, I was in 1987 taking my first steps into social justice as a teacher during apartheid in South Africa, and 34 years later, I'm happy to see that we're all kind of changing a bit more, including philanthropy. But one of the things that we still get hung up on is terminology. We have framed this as just transition and climate justice, and what I would ask all of us to do is remember that if we let terminology itself and our interpretations of what we think that means, we will never come together in collaboration. We will scare away some of the big money that we want. And at the end of the day, if you ask me what it's really about, we want to create programs and opportunities that are worthy of the most forgotten and accepted by the most powerful. And if we do that, we will get there. So we're excited about this. We hope that we can excite many more to join us in this and to do really meaningful things. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Liz. Our final speaker is Athena Ronquillo Ballesteros. She's from the Climate Leadership Initiative. Athena, from your work at the Climate Leadership Initiative, how do you see this landscape shifting towards climate justice and just transition?
All right. It's like a quiz, isn't it? You don't know what the question is. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Farhana and Heather, for inviting me. I must say, this is the first year that I am not a pink badger, and I don't know what if people know what that means. This is the first year after 20 years that I'm not negotiating on climate finance, like Farhana, which means I get to attend events like this. And it's heartwarming and refreshing and rejuvenating. I just came from a climate finance event where people are talking about the $100 billion and the needs determination report. And I must say it's very, very depressing. And then you come into this event and go, oh, here where all the answers are. Just briefly, so our organization, the Climate Leadership Initiative, is very new. It's 2.5 years old, I think. We play a slightly different role than many of the foundations here because we're not grant makers, we're strategic advisors to new donors who want to come into climate. So as somebody from ClimateWorks may already have reminded you, less than 2% of global philanthropy goes to climate, and that is not acceptable, especially at this day and age. And so we're trying to ratchet up people giving to climate. What I tell my kids, my most uncomfortable job is to get more money from richer people who have way more money than people already giving to climate, to give way more money to climate because we deserve it. The people and the planet deserve it. And we're probably trying to raise money from a lot of the families and high net worth individuals who may have been responsible for parts of the problems that a lot of indigenous and local communities are facing. So I see that not as charity, I see that as their moral obligation and responsibility to give back. So to me, that's the job. And I actually thought I will be fired from my job my first 6 months. I think I told Heather that and Farhana. But I'm 7 months old on the job. And so I'll tell you two things that are changing. One is our role is to dream big, right? A lot of us, I used to be like Kate Hampton, who was your earlier speaker. She was my intern when I was an anti-coal campaigner in the Philippines. I don't know if people knew that. So a lot of us have come from the grassroots, from the ranks, from the movement, and have been given incredible privilege, mentored by some of the people in this room to be where we are, to work for international organizations and to work for philanthropy. And though it's very uncomfortable, we have to, otherwise you're not going to be able to change this system and the decision making just from the outside. So two things that have shifted in our landscape. One is over the last 18 months, we have shown and demonstrated that if there's an ecosystem ready to absorb large chunks of money, and that ecology of movements that you presented earlier is an example, we could go and chase that money as a community and have collective impact. But, and this is the other sub-lesson to that one, the plumbing and the infrastructure of that and ensuring the connective tissue also has to be resourced. And here, I always give that homework to existing funders, people in this room, because we can't do that, because new donors don't know how to fund new organizations. They don't know how to fund new platforms. So we have to create, and this is the second lesson, new platforms, new intermediaries, Global South and women-led platforms who can absorb the money. When Kevin Curry from Ford called us last year about an Indigenous peoples and local community-led initiative, starting with the 10-year facility, we're like, oh, how much money do you need? So maybe 20, 30, 40 million dollars. And we said, well, we could dream bigger because there's a lot of people who get it that Indigenous peoples are the guardians of the earth and the forest. We just have to present it to them in a bigger way because the ticket size could be bigger. Well, we've raised $70 million for the 10-year facility. I mean, we've never done that before for a community. And so my team in particular that works on strategies and content, we are built to prop up local communities, local solutions, but we have to be able to work with existing funders to build that plumbing and infrastructure. My last point is I want to respond to one of the questions on the chat, which is looking at those ready to receive funding, how many are based in the majority world where the issues and the impacts are being felt? And the reason why I want to respond to this question is I have a homework for all of you in this room and those listening to the webinar, that when I joined CLI, we're trying to build a solutions library for climate. And I can tell you that 90% of the solutions that are being presented to us are either from, well, they're from the global north, either from the US or from Europe, some from Australia, but less than 5% are coming from the global south. And I said that to Uzma the other day. And so I'm really happy that philanthropists are shifting their attention. So my message is, if we want your efforts, our collective efforts that are built from the ground, resourced and funded, we have to collectively build that infrastructure together. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to raise the level of ambition. Thanks.
Thank you, Athena. I'm looking for the time. Do we have 15 minutes to continue the conversation and address some of the questions? Okay. Yes. 7 minutes then. I don't think that everybody will be speaking again, so maybe what I can do is just open some of the questions, and then you can just raise your hand and please take the initiative and answer them. So we're listening and we're also reading some of the questions there. We have been talking about addressing power, changing the mind shifts, and the way that power is being used. How do these new platforms center justice and the leadership and agency of grassroots communities, indigenous peoples, and local communities? We'll start with some of the questions here. One of them is, in the interest of transparency and accountability, it's great that you feel strongly about loss and damage, but how is Scotland practically contributing to loss and damage? Maybe that's a question that is a little bit disconnected, so let me just ask another question. You were part of, for Farhana. Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so one of the questions that I'm interested in from the other session is, it's great, like you're saying, Athena, that we really need to use our imaginations and think bigger. We also need to address the current injustices. What are we doing about injustice today? From your own experience and perspectives and what we have heard today, is there anything else that you'd like to add about this conversation?
I mean, listening. We have to absolutely listen. We've got to bring people up to the table that we're all speaking on. That's come up quite a few times today. But we need to be talking to the people on the ground, amplifying their voices, creating spaces where we turn the table and we shift the dialogue so that we in the Western world are not center of attention. And we need to then look at how we apply that to the funding models that we are utilizing and start imbuing those with exceptional values that include reciprocity, respect, and, you know, the just transition, but by doing that, putting our money where our mouth is and really focusing on funding the core and listening to what their needs are and being led by that.
I just want to add something, two other things actually. Athena very correctly brought up the uncomfortable truth that only 2% of philanthropy worldwide goes towards climate. And that's not just climate and vulnerable communities, that's everything, mitigation, all of our initiatives. But there is some hope in shifting this, and I want to draw everyone's attention to something that is now going to be led worldwide by Wings, and you can go to a website called philanthropyforclimate.org, which is asking non-climate funders in particular to sign up to any one or more of 7 pillars of how they're going to shift their resources, educate their boards, do many more things. There are 350 foundations that have already signed up for this, and this is a promising start, and I think it's quite important. Another thing that I think we need to do to challenge some of our perceptions is, it's often said when a foundation is, or people like me are speaking to their boards and we're trying to describe the promise of a young or a new organization, oh, there's not a lot of auditing statements there. There's not a big track record. There's not a big staff. And that's why we end up with some of the problems that you described of going to well-known institutions. But it's not the same when you're in Silicon Valley and a guy in a hoodie comes up and says, I've got a great idea to change the world, and all of a sudden he gets $50 million in angel capital, right? Venture capital. Why is that? Because there's usually someone else behind him or her to stand up for that and to see the potential. And we need more of those champions. We need people actually in the North to subordinate themselves and stand by the groups in the South and actually say, this is a really well-run organization, by the way. I'll vouch for them. And I think that kind of solidarity is needed now more than ever.
Okay. Do we want to close now, Farhana?
Well, I mean, I think we're still in the phase of hiring staff, literally, to fulfill many of our positions. That, you know, there's already been a commitment by Andrew Stair that in our work in nature and climate, that we're going to integrate equity across all of our programming. And that's a commitment that he's very, very serious about, as is the Vice President. And I think, you know, over the next year, we'll start developing, you know, real well laid out strategies as to how to make that a reality, and looking at what is the landscape of re-grantors, individual organizations who we will have as our own grantees, and then also looking at these platforms. There was a discussion about which platforms, you know, would be good to fund. I think all of those discussions still have to be had. It's a very exciting time at the fund. We're in still startup mode. But, you know, there's a clear commitment to continue to learn in this space, to understand where the gaps are, and to see that this issue of climate justice is considered as, you know, if we're talking about equity, we're talking about climate justice and just transition. So how to build that into the fund's work, I think, will be really critical in the next year. That's all I can say right now.
You mentioned something about mistakes before, and I don't know who's been giving you that advice, and I agree that we should be learning from each other in the most exceptional way. But I just don't want us to think that making mistakes is a bad thing, because that is actually how we learn. And so we do need to actually fail our way to success sometimes. And so, but I do think also that we have a community of funders that can all support each other, and we have to do that in a much broader capacity. And I just don't want us to also think about mistakes and equate those to taking risks, because right now we also need to take a lot more risk, and there's different kinds of risk that we can take. And there's lots of ways in which we can address that. I got her riled up, now she wants the mic.
Sorry, let me just add something, because one of the framing questions, I think, is what should new donors do? I can tell you with all honesty that it's so exciting to work with new donors who do not have boards yet and who do not have staff yet, because we get to staff them. And my favorite new donors right now, they're not the tech billionaires yet. Maybe they will be in 5 years, but the younger ones, literally, some are 29, 30, 31-year-old kids. Like, they show up on Zoom and they look like my children. I'm like, oh, how do I ask money from these people? But I call them the purest of the purest, because they literally would tell us, you know, we stumbled into this well. Like this my favorite couple that I told you about, Kevin. We stumbled into this well quite accidentally during COVID, because they run a platform that does creative graphics. And suddenly their company went from being 20 million to 900 million. And I think before the end of this year, it's going to be $1 billion company. And they have no opinion, and they have no preconceived notions about what works or not. They do ask about what lessons have you learned rather than mistakes, and say, how can we do better? And that's where I feel this incredible responsibility of having, from my perch, having the power and the privilege of how do you advise these people who know nothing about climate, but who really mean well. And that's where our business model, or our modus operandi, is to lean on the community and ask for the best advice, and we give them options. So we don't give them one or two things you can do, we give them a spread. And we've actually been successful in teaching new donors about how to center equity and justice. And to the credit of the Bezos team, even though they're lean, we have worked closely with them since the beginning in trying to make sure that there's a significant attention being paid to equity and justice groups in the US as part of the federal work. And now we would encourage them to do that globally. And we could build it and then give it to Carol as a homework, basically.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I think that we are in a context where, like you say, Jessica, experimentation and also failing forward is absolutely necessary. What I think where there's no excuse is in continuing to deny voices, continuing to repeat the colonial practices of philanthropy that we know have failed. So maybe the solution is to continue to experiment and look for new things and learn from each other and invite new donors and invite new money, but make sure that we address power and that we address the injustices of today, and that we absolutely partner. And when we say partner, it's not just giving them a voice to consult with them, it's really about making sure that the money goes to the hands and the decisions and agency of the people who are most affected and the ones who have the solution. And denying that voice is the mistake that we cannot afford to continue to do in philanthropy. Thank you so much. And I apologize, by the way, to the speakers for not preparing the questions before. I also had the challenge of doing this, but thank you so much. I think that we all learn from each other, and hopefully this can be repeated again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If you can just stay in your seats for 10 more minutes, and then we'll be wrapped up. We've got Jason. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I know it's been a long afternoon, but hopefully super inspiring and lots of rich discussion and wisdom to take away. I'm delighted to close with some reflections from our founding members of this collaborative. So I'm going to hand over to Atelier from Bosch and Heather to share their reflections on what they've learned this afternoon.
Thank you so much. I think what we have learned, especially from the previous panel, is that highlighting issues of justice and channeling more support to locally led solutions is not only an issue to push forward in the official climate negotiations. We as philanthropic donors also need to, and as we heard today, we can do our part. And an organization that is pioneering in this regard is the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, headed by Heather, which has been mentioned quite a few times this afternoon. Since its inception in 2017, it puts people, their rights and their lived experience in the center and heart of climate action. And it does so by rooting its grant making in principles of intersectionality, in supporting women, youth, and indigenous people, and by supporting people on the front lines of the climate crisis to lead and innovate, and to build voice and power from local to global. And this people-centered commitment to connecting the issues of climate change and social justice is what convinced us as Robert Bosch Stiftung to join the Climate Justice Resilience Fund in 2019. And as a member of the review board of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, it's a great pleasure for me today, together with Heather, to announce the start of the design of a second phase of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. Staying true to its transformational spirit, the next step for CJRF is to go beyond merely expanding its grant-making activities. It's to strive to become a more equitable and more transparent fund, as was discussed in the panel just now. As the fund approaches the end of its first phase in early 2023, a group consisting of current CJRF funders, grantees, and experts will be exploring how to set up the next phase of the fund. And we want this to be a process that is driven by the field and as inclusive as possible, to build a governance structure that makes grant making better, more effective, and more just, and takes the task of power sharing seriously. And we hope, of course, that many of you being here today will join us in that process. And with that, I hand over to Heather.
Thank you so much, Atelier. This is really a very exciting transition for our fund, and I think it's actually very much a response to what you just heard from many of these panelists around the need for philanthropy to shift power, to be more responsive, to do more listening. And so we are setting up a process where we will set up a new way of governing this fund. We're actually launching quite soon, and we're even doing some consultations with current partners and with others in the field here at the COP this week and next. We're constituting a design team that will look at the work of the fund and look at the gaps in the field and listen to others to identify some options for how we could shift, how we make our grant-making decisions, and how we can share the power of those decisions with people in the field and on the ground. And then finally, there will be a big consultative, messy engagement phase with all of our partners to look at those design team recommendations and options in order to decide how we decide going forward and how we decide more equitably, so that we're not just investing in justice, we're also executing it ourselves. With that, I'll hand off to
Thank you, Heather. So when we started this group of funders collaborating together to talk about this issue, the idea was to go beyond those funders who are already committed and to try to see how we can reach out to a broader group, what I like to consider perhaps the mainstream funders, and what we've heard today, also the new funders. And we started off fairly innocently to say, well, first we need a landscape. We need to know who's funding what and who's receiving that funding. And we had a fairly standard consultant try to go out and do that landscape. And the poor folks got pummeled in their great intentions because the field said, we don't want to be defined the way you're defining us. Our work is highly intersectional. We don't divide off climate justice and just transition and mitigation and adaptation and so forth. And that was an extremely important learning experience for them and for us. And it's actually led to a lot deeper reflection in the kind of work that Farhana and her team is now leading that you're seeing here. And we are continuing that also at ClimateWorks Foundation, because among our other roles, we provide global intelligence about climate change, but also about philanthropic giving. We also convene philanthropy, and we do strategy and grant making into the field. So we are trying to answer the kinds of questions that will allow grant makers to say justice and just transition fits into what we're trying to do because it's a fundamental part of our mission and not something that's just off in a corner somewhere. And I think we've heard from all of the panels today really compelling stories and evidence about why that is the case. So for example, we heard in the very beginning the idea that loss and damage, although it is just barely getting any recognition and just the initial kind of funding that it needs, it really speaks to a fundamental truth, which is that things are bad for a lot of people already right now. This isn't just a story about the future. And as Minister McAllan said, it's actually a window into a broader truth. And what I would consider that to be is that for a lot of mainstream mitigation climate funders, they view climate change as a technical problem to be solved to avoid things getting worse in the future. And that framing sets you off into a completely different direction to the one that we're talking about right here. And so that's very important to resolve right at the outset. Now, in the second panel, Calfin pointed out to us that we are all a kind of community. Many of us has known each other for many years, and we run into each other for whatever it's failing. The UNFCCC creates a kind of set of bonds. It's actually kind of admirable that we would like to see replicated in a lot of other places. But even within that community, there are these splits where, for example, there are frustrations about the people who keep banging on about justice and derailing us from our fundamental mission, which is just to get on with the commitments we need around mitigation. I mean, people who have been around this for years have been at loggerheads over that period of time where we can't seem to get over some of these splits within the community because they seem to be doing different things. But we're hearing today, no, they aren't actually doing different things. And that's really a fundamental shift. We heard Salim talking about how we need to reframe these communities who seem to be just victims of this process that's going on. No, they are actually the first adapters. They are the people who are teaching us, and I would say more broadly speaking, indigenous communities and people who have been the subject of colonialism, these are the communities that are teaching everyone in the world what it's like to be at the front edge of something that's coming at you, and how you adapt and how you become resilient and continue in the world. And that's such an important thing. And then finally, we heard that things are changing. That's very interesting that all of the speakers from the foundations are saying how, as much as, for example, racial injustice has been a fact for hundreds of years, and we've seen it in the United States, for example, something really did snap last year. And the Black Lives Matter and the reaction to that, it has, and I've seen this from within philanthropy, something has changed, and it's having real implications for the way people are reacting. And that new money that's coming in is being very well advised by Athena and CLI and others. And so I think we have a real chance now, and there's a way, the door is open, we can wedge it open even further.
I go back a long way. I was a party of Climate Works. I've got many friends here, some of whom were college students of mine, including Kate's husband. So I feel like I've aged, but in the last 2 minutes before we leave the auditorium in a very dignified way to our nibbles, I want to just present a big vision. Funding the Justice Reset from Glasgow to COP27. So, you know, I'm a wordsmith, and that was a deliberate choice. 1 year to raise, spend, report back on $1 billion to that field that is going to be in the compendium, the field that you know. We should set ourselves an ambitious target in philanthropy. This is not even a very big amount of money. If you're Jeff Bezos, you're giving out 10 billion, 50 million and so forth. We can do that. The field is asking for that. It's ready for that. It deserves that. We need to come back to the next COP. I wish we could come back with half of it by the SB meetings and report back on that. And that's my conclusion, my vision for why you're all here, really. And I'm going to go back, Athena, with my pink badge to negotiate for some of that to happen, because the COP process does work. I know it's frustratingly slow. I'm heartbroken sometimes when I think about the slowness of it and how much we could have done more, but it is working. You know, it's the first time the scientists, I contacted them, read all the stuff yesterday, and with the additional announcements that were made yesterday, we're at 1.9. I know it's not 1.5, but it was 2.7, and it was nearly 3 at Paris. We are getting there, and we need to trust ourselves, and we need to trust those in the field, as we call it, insultingly slightly. So we are getting there, and I just want to say thank you so much. The way we'll do this is discussions like this, truth-telling to each other, using participatory methods, assemblies, trust-based participatory grant-making at the heart of it all. So those are some of the thoughts I want to leave you with. Concretely, we'll send you lots of emails, ask you to join, ask you to send stuff onwards and help us complete as much as we can a better version of that compendium very shortly. So with that, I want to thank also Jouja for moderating this, all the moderators, all of you. The cafe is over there. There's a lovely reception for you. So please come and join us. And thank you to ScottishPower for hosting us as well, and their security team who went through a lot today. Thank you so much. Bye.